welcome to the Promethean Secular Uprising. I'm your host, Joshua the Void, and I am here to host, I guess. But tonight we're having an after party, so we're going to jump right into the after party right now. We have somebody who is a close friend of mine, Katie Sykes, who's here today. So we're going to just bring up everybody at the moment. Scott Williamson, Katie Sykes, how are you doing today?
I'm
Oh
doing well,
man,
thank you.
doing
Damn
wonderful, wonderful day.
right,
Great
damn
show,
right.
you two, by the way.
Thank you. I really do appreciate it. Oh, all right. Jimbo wants to actually join in, so we're gonna have another individual coming on through.
All right,
All righty.
all right.
You know this is going to be
Nice.
fantastic. I actually really do like talking with him too.
Yeah.
So no, this is going to be fantastic. So, without any further ado, Katie, what did you think about the show thus far, and what is your perspective on skepticism and spiritualism? Are they reconcilable? Are they irreconcilable? What do you think?
Yeah, so I was dipping in and out of listening because I was in the chat and with Mike, and um, I was also looking at different, furiously trying to find some actual studies on Google Scholar
Makes
um,
sense. Makes sense.
that
Mm-hmm.
prove anything on the on the spirituality side of things.
Right.
And yeah, so I wasted a lot of time doing that. But yeah, I couldn't really find anything recent. There was stuff that was done about just over 10 years ago and stuff. Seems to have been quite a phase going on, trying to study, scientifically study spirituality. But it seems like it never really led anywhere. There wasn't anything to suggest that anything happening spiritually was happening outside of the body.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of evidence to say that it's happening within the brain,
Mm-hmm.
and we can pinpoint exactly where in the brain it's happening, and we can even induce spirituality within people who report not to be spiritual beforehand. Um, but that's all I could find.
Yeah.
Personally, myself, my position on it is very much coming from the skeptic side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
Until something can be proven, then I'm just going to say, well, I don't really know. And from what I can see, what is proven right now is that everything is happening within the brain itself. So there's
Right.
nothing inherent outside of that.
And I would
mm,
tend to agree with you. I would tend to agree with you. So, which a lot of people conflate spirituality as a label to mean religious ideals or supernaturalism or some sort of metaphysical truth, right? Like particular one, any particular metaphysical claim, I might say, like angels, spirits, miracles, magic, stuff like that, isn't necessarily entailed in spirituality, right?
No,
And then
not at all.
right, because we have to look at different cultures have different versions of spirituality that don't entail the supernatural or ideas about God or anything like that. So so we know it's possible to use that label in that way. Now, sometimes, especially in the West, I think that we have this convoluted idea about spirituality that we don't really even know what it means. It's like it can mean anything. It's so ambiguous and it's useless as a term. And that would
mm.
be one point you could say where skepticism. But then you want religious people, or if you did view spiritual people as religious people, wouldn't you want them to be skeptical? Would you want them to start being skeptical minded and get around skeptics and challenge their views, kind of like what we're doing tonight? you know, like that's the way that we interact and we all grow together. Like you guys can show me things or make points that I haven't
Right.
really thought about,
Exactly.
right?
And likewise,
Right.
like
And
that's the
so,
beauty of of this interaction is that sometimes there can be certain things that we haven't thought about. And through our interactions with each other, we can then start thinking of different perspectives
right,
or
and grow. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
See, that's my only point, to say that they're consistent, at least in a utilitarian sort of way. Like it depends on what your question is. Like I was saying earlier, if your question to understand how does how do synapses connect and pass information through the brain? How does
Okay.
that give rise to an experience? Those are scientific questions, but they also are sort of spiritual, in the sense that you have this emotional need to know answers. You know what I mean? Like Neil deGrasse Tyson once said that, the motivation behind what makes me do what I do is a very spiritual experience. It's kind of like riding a bike on a marathon, where you're in the flow state. It gives you that focus. So that in itself is sort of like a meditation, if you will, to focus on anything.
Hmm.
So in a way,
Yeah.
everything could be called a spiritual, and then all meaning breaks down. I understand what you mean with the
Yeah, I
semantics.
wouldn't say that every experience is a spiritual experience. I think there's
Right,
definitely a major distinction between the two,
right,
and we can
right,
actually pinpoint what part of the brain is actually being used when we talk about a spiritual experience. So
right.
when Neil deGrasse Tyson is talking about
The
talking about
flow
what he
state. Yeah.
said there, yeah, the flow state and everything, being in a spiritual experience and things, then yeah, we can actually pinpoint what he means by that
Yeah.
physically. There's no like sort of extraordinary thing going on there. But to
You
say
know,
that like the emotional state is it is spirituality in a way, I would disagree with, because we can pinpoint those two distinct things, the emotional experience and the spiritual experience, in working from different parts of
mm.
the actual brain itself.
So let me ask you this, Katie. This is maybe a good question to ask. Um, how do you view what materiality is? What do you think material is? Not just what it does, like how it behaves. I mean, what do you think material is?
Well, as far as the brain is concerned,
Yeah,
like
like the
as far as
brain.
our experience and things. Well, the material part of that would be the brain itself, the actual matter, the grey and the white matter and everything that makes up
Mm-hmm.
the brain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then obviously you've got the neurons firing and things like that, which are connected to all of that. And then there's the experience part of it, which is the more of what we would study with psychology instead of neurobiology.
Right, and it seems like even on both counts, whether you're doing like psychology or brain science, like looking at the material brain, it seems like you're trying to look at consciousness from a kind of third party viewpoint, right? Because there's an inner quality. Some people call it qualia. I don't know if you believe in qualia or not. I don't even know if I believe in
No,
qualia.
no,
I don't know if I
no.
believe in qualia.
I haven't heard a decent definition of what qualia even is.
Me neither.
So
Me neither. So I don't know what it is. So I can't really believe in it. But there is this feel something that we usually call an experience, and that's what the brain's like from a first person viewpoint. You know.
Right.
So I think that the problem that we run into when we start talking about these things and really trying to bridge an understanding is science is looking from an objective third party point of view, whereas consciousness by nature is subjective. So science is objective by nature, consciousness is subjective by nature, because it's how it feels to be me or to be this brain, right?
Right.
yeah, and that's why psychology officially isn't classed as a like a STEM science or anything. It's not like
Right.
it's more classed. Actually, if you're going to go and get an undergraduate degree in psychology, then you're actually not getting a bachelor's of science. You're getting a bachelor's of art. So
Right,
Yeah,
exactly. Good point. Good point.
yeah.
Uh,
So when we're actually talking about the science behind it, what we're actually talking about is biological psychology,
Mm-hmm.
which links
Mm-hmm.
very heavily with neurobiology.
Absolutely.
Whereas if we're going to be talking about the experience, and we're going to be talking about clinical psychology or
Mm-hmm.
social psychology as well,
Right.
depending on the
Right.
situation.
Right.
Absolutely. Before we continue, I want to introduce Cafe to the conversation. Cafe, how are you doing, my man? What's going on?
Hey man, it's been a while since I
You're
talked to
telling
you.
me, eh? How are you doing, my dude?
Pretty good, man. I'm just chiming in, but these are some of my favorite topics, man. So I'm glad you invited me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh,
It's been a
absolutely.
while
I saw
since
you
we
in the
spoke.
conversation. Hey, I saw you in the comments section. I was like, okay, I need to have my man Cafe in here in order to have that conversation. That was my number one thing.
Absolutely.
So during the conversation, what did you think? And also, what is your position based on skepticism and spiritualism? Do you think that they're reconcilable or irreconcilable?
No, definitely. I mean, the last time we spoke, I was at great pains to try to get that point across.
Right.
That we're talking about the very same thing in two very different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
when you deal with neuroscience or what have you, we emphasize the mystical experience and stuff like that. In these type of conversations, of course, you have the hard problem of consciousness. People talk about the analogy I really like between the spiritualist and the materialist is one that I borrowed from Graham Hancock, and I think I spoke to you about it the last time I was on. I said, quoting Graham Hancock, he was talking about how materialists. I'm not necessarily pinpointing atheists, but people who hold to a materialist perspective, they will necessarily define consciousness akin to use Graham Hancock's metaphor, like a factory producing cars. And so, as long as the cars are being produced, the cars are analogous to consciousness in this model. And so, if you destroy the factory, then consciousness blinks out. That's one model. That's one way to see it. And one thing I hear a lot of materialist types use is like, well, do you see consciousness without a brain? And I think that's missing the point, because like I think the other model from the spiritualist vantage point is more akin to a radio transceiver. Just like the radio, when you listen to the radio, you can only tune into one radio station at a time. And in the very same way, speaking of like invoking quantum physics or M theories, superstring theory, things like that, multi-world theory, our brain is kind of a radio transceiver to this one universe that we're all sharing. And so like, but simultaneously, as a lot of these physicists like to say, exists every single other possible universe, very simultaneously in your very room. There's the universe where dinosaurs never died, where
Oh
Hitler
yeah.
won the war, so on and so forth. But we happen to be in tune with this one that we're sharing right now to even have this conversation.
Yeah. That's the strive for oneness aspect of spirituality. So there's different ways to get there, and so some people posit things like orc ore, for example, like these quantum mind sort of theories, or you could say like this idealism or anything like that, or materialism, like the mind is simply an epiphenomenal thing. It's not real. It doesn't exist. It's just whatever your explanations are. These come out of thinking, and you have to understand our thinking is very limited, and it's based on perceptions. And so these really big ontological questions, for me, I'm very agnostic about them, just for me personally. Like,
Mhm.
but what I do know is that there is a oneness, and you don't have to posit any of these things to get there. All you have to do is understand that you exist. When you understand that the first primary thing that you know for sure, like, you can question everything else. You might be a brain in a vat, but you exist. You could be as a brain in a vat, could be as a soul, could be as a ghost, it could be as a physical person. Whatever your attribution is, the first thing is you exist. And that's who you really are. The rest of that thinking stuff are narratives. They're ego self narratives that attempt to explain the unknown and explain the answers and connect, which is all cool. It's
But
all part of the
isn't
journey, you know?
everybody
I
trying
think
to?
what the
Oh, go
yeah,
ahead, Katie. Go
sorry,
ahead.
yeah, I think what the real question is, though, what we're discussing here is whether it is what actually exists. Like, you know, a
There you go.
spiritualist is saying that, well, really, what exists is more than what we can observe.
Well, of course. And
Whereas, say, someone like me is arguing, well, actually, all we can observe, all we can actually know is that we are the bodies that we inhabit, the freaking brains that we
mhm.
are, the actual matter that is actually there. And we can actually turn off that, what we call the consciousness. We can turn that off by affecting those different systems.
That for me that's fine. For me that stuff is sort of interesting, you know. It addresses like a lot of ancient questions people have about living forever and stuff like that. I guess for me, that stuff is if I can't know certain answers, I don't really worry about that, right? Like as far as I know, like I was not conscious before I was born.
Right.
So I don't dread like who I was before I was born, if that even makes sense.
He's
No,
like,
no,
hey,
I
Much
really,
less, you know.
real quick, I just want to say that I like your attitude towards that, Scott. I think it's honest, taking that type of position, because I sometimes, I engage in a lot of forums and stuff. Sometimes I try not to waste too much time in there, but
Hmm.
what I see very frequently is that there's certain assumptions out of a materialist point of view. For instance, if you're dealing with consciousness, the very primary, basis assumption is that that consciousness is generated by the brain.
Hmm.
And like you said, you were skeptical about that. You said we could be brain in the vat, and so on and
Hmm.
so forth. But I think a lot of materialists, they take that to heart to mean that as though it's concrete and factual. When if you actually take a gander into all the neuroscientific studies that have been done to date, you will not find any evidence of that whatsoever. It's still, consciousness is still quite a mystery to neuroscience, and there's nothing so concrete in neuroscience to establish that consciousness is something generated by the brain. That's the very premise assumption.
It's not that. It's not that that we're saying that that it is fact, that it's all like factual, and that we know that it is only generated by the brain. All we're actually saying is that this is what we can observe. This is what we have
No,
observed.
sure,
This is the
I
data
accept
that
that.
we have. This is what's been said. So anything else, saying anything other than that would be the assumption itself. So we're not actually making the assumption. It's we're just saying that this is what we know. Other than that, we don't know.
so
See,
you're
there.
saying that there are certain postulates that people make without the evidence of those postulates being true, and in and of themselves, what that kind of brings forward to the table is more or less just there's no evidential claim based on the postulate that the
Hmm.
individual is making. So it's more based
Hmm.
on the subjective experience that that person is having. Is that what you're saying, Katie? If I'm understanding?
Yeah, in a sense, yeah, definitely. I mean, I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be, making those points and things like that that are extra to what we know and stuff. They're the greatest thought experiments, but when it comes to what we actually know and what is real and what is not real, when we're trying to sort of come to more knowledge on that, then you don't want to turn those thought experiments into an assumption.
Right, and it's good. Again, it's really great to be kind of humble um, when we talk about these sort of ontological big questions like consciousness. Where does the brain produce consciousness? What's the evidence? Um, the thing is that there are leading scientists out there right now on the table, there's like a handful of theories that are the best models we have in science from a scientific perspective. Some of these would be called, most of these are sort of, oddly enough, they're sort of panpsychist sort of things, and I reject them, but they're sort of like panpsychist sort of theories, like information, IIT, integrated information theory, where they describe everything as having a level of consciousness they call pi. So the more complex the network gets or whatever, the higher the number of pi goes, which would talk about how conscious that organism may be, right? And then you've got the global workspace theory, that talks about, we sort of mirror off each other, like a little information goes here, it bounces there, and it emerges in our brain as an afterthought, And then there's idealistic sort of explanations like Donald Hoffman or whatever. But what all these guys can't do, whenever they show up at these conferences, they always ask them, so can you tell me, how do you explain the taste of chocolate? What neuron controls the taste of vanilla as opposed to the smell of a rose or garlic? Right? They can't do that yet. No one has a clue on that. So they're all sort of failing out, with that. And so I don't really care about a whole lot of that stuff because it could be anything. We could be just a big dream for all I know. But I just think we should have humility when we talk about stuff like that, like not make these big truth claims, like correlation isn't causation, and it may be consistent with all these views anyways. So which one wins,
I like how you traverse, panpsychism, pan-experientialism, all that. While you said that you reject it, nevertheless, it's something you considered. So I think that's, it's a sign of an open mind right there. Because some of the views that I take are, they lean towards more panpsychist and pan-experientialism.
It's interesting. It is. Well, me and Joshua, I think we do hold at least that what was it? I'm sorry, biopsychism.
Biopsychism.
I remember I was telling you about biopsychism, and we were kind of talking about that. That's definitely true.
Yes, absolutely.
We can definitely see evidence for that.
But the problem with panpsychism is stating that even atoms in and of themselves have some sort of potential of consciousness and stuff like that. You could say that they have information, but I wouldn't state that information in and of itself is some sort of akin to consciousness. I would just say that it's a different form of physical extract, but it's not the same.
I think where it comes from, Kafi, I think where the consciousness comes from is the laws of nature plus clumping together biological systems, regardless of how small they are, when it's called emergentism. So there's some sort of law in nature that says that if you clump these two things together, seemingly by magic, you get intelligence or some sort of cognition, some sort of form of cognition. And we can see that through the evidence. Now it's all sort of still deterministic, but so are we as human brains. We're the same way. We just operate at a higher level. And we're the result of all those interactions that play a part in the background, right? So what it is it's just another way of saying that we are really essentially nature itself experiencing its own processing. That's what we are. That's a spiritual truth or a spiritual teaching, you might say.
Yeah, one of the things from last night, Scott, you played that video last night on the I can't remember his name,
Michael
that scientist.
yeah.
That guy. One of the things that I actually liked that what he said was, which I completely agree with, is one of the things that we as humans are very bad at is understanding intelligence in things that are much larger than us, or the intelligence in things that are much smaller than us. And it's something that holds true across the board for humans, and we always need to keep this in mind, that we understand our own processes and our own intelligence a lot, and things to do with us and stuff that is similar to us, but we don't understand things. We have a very hard time understanding things which differ from us.
Right. And it's where anthropomorphic, I guess is the word, where we just think that anything that's um, the standard gold standard of consciousness and intelligence is us humans. Like, how convenient. Like, you know, you can never imagine that anything smaller than you would be intelligent at all. Like, we're
Right.
too special for that.
And
You know,
how about you, Cafe? What do you think, my man?
Well, you mentioned how you couldn't see atoms having a form of consciousness, and I think in the panpsychist view, obviously it's an atom. If it's to possess consciousness at all, it wouldn't be to the degree that we share right now. That
right,
what
of
we enjoy,
course,
the type
of
of consciousness
course,
we enjoy.
proto
Yeah, it
consciousness.
would
Yeah.
be like a type of like rudimentary consciousness, like
Right.
just like pure consciousness. Just
Right. That's IIT. That's
But
that
what is
information,
pure
integrated information.
consciousness, though? Because wouldn't
That's
you
the one.
say that consciousness in and of itself, or whatever, or maybe like human or higher than human consciousness, let's just say
Mhm.
there's another being, not a god, but just a
Yeah.
being in and of itself that might have a higher consciousness than a human being, let's just say, wouldn't that be pure consciousness, to understand one's awareness and at the same exact time to understand the environment which is around a particular individual?
No, definitely. I think this is where it kind of clashes with the materialist view that because if you don't posit a panpsychism model, then you have to rely on abiogenesis, where consciousness emerges out of the complex variations that
Correct.
come about. And so you have that distinction. One I really liked was Aldous Huxley. I think I mentioned it last time too. Was
Yeah.
the mind at large.
Mm-hmm.
He felt that each one of us as an individual is actually experiencing a kind of low bandwidth of consciousness, that our mind right now is being filtered. And when you undergo certain spiritual experiences, these filters are removed, and you see the one mind that's behind the multiplicity of the world. The Hindus might call it Brahman. You might hear it as God, Allah, so forth. And that was the idea with Aldous Huxley. He called it the reducing valve of consciousness. That I think even Schrodinger had a quote that maybe you've heard it. He said, "The total number of minds in the universe is one. In fact, consciousness is a singularity phasing within all beings." That kind of like you remember Terminator, the Mercury, the T-1000, when like he melts and if
Yeah.
he
He's
disassembles himself,
like fractals.
yeah, like yeah, he'll so in a way we're all droplets of a higher hive mind, that's expressing itself in these individual phases, but ultimately it's one thing. I really like Einstein, his idea of the block universe. Maybe,
Yeah.
yeah,
Same. Yeah.
where
Same idea.
yeah, the same idea, where from the Big
But
Bang to
but here's the problem. I'm going to play devil's advocate.
yeah, go ahead.
Not that I'm really believing this 100% or whatever, but I want to make the argument just to kind of challenge your guys' minds, because this is something we can't get around.
Let's do it.
All of these theories of mind you're talking about, materialism, and then panpsychism, which is really just another form. It's another way materialism is trying to explain consciousness. It's trying to say, well, material just is consciousness too. So it's trying to just carry it along. It's just moving the starting point earlier
Mhm.
instead of way out here where it was. It's trying to move because it's more parsimonious somehow that way, right? But here's something even more parsimonious. And this is actually based in truth. The fact is, all of these theories, panpsychism included, are based on the idea that matter and energy is fundamental. That's what you're basing that on.
Yeah.
Consciousness couldn't be fundamental if matter and energy weren't fundamental, right? But guess what? Most physicists, most theoretical physicists understand that matter and energy are not fundamental. They break down at the 10 to the minus 33 centimeters that's when things stop making sense. And T minus 44 centimeters for time, the Planck scale.
Yeah,
So
thanks, Joe.
even quantum mechanics breaks down at a certain level where we can't observe it anymore. So now we have to transcend matter and energy and talk about something else as being the fundamental thing. So consciousness, and by the way, whatever we find, whatever we posit to be true about
Mhm.
this, fundamental nature of reality, the theory has to bring back all the matter and energy and consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that consciousness is probably rooted in something even well beyond, um, matter and energy. So that's where panpsychism kind of fails, because it's not understanding that it's trying to plant its tree in the wrong place still. It's still not far enough back, you know.
But I think that when we really look at it, right, and if we truly delve into the ideas and the concepts which are there for, let's just say, consciousness, and even let's just say spiritualism in and of itself, because spiritualism, I think, confuses that aspect of consciousness. I think that it takes consciousness and kind of like runs with it in a particular way that then makes it out of reach of the sciences in a sense. I think that
Oh yeah.
it has to do that in order to still make it ambiguous and
Well,
stuff. It
collective
needs to.
spirituality, like spiritual movements, do that. Um, I would say that the spirituality that I'm endorsing is a more personal, subjective sort of meaning. It's all about finding meaning in your experience, rather than you know fretting over the big questions, because those big questions could ultimately be solved, or they may not ever be solved.
That
And
is definitely true.
that's okay, and it probably won't be. um, that could be
Well,
a
there's just
very
more
good possibility.
questions once you
Yeah,
open
there.
up that door. So
Yeah, and
I
you
completely
ask the
agree.
question, and you go through it, and you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to make but you have to ask the metaphysical questions, because physics can't ask those questions right now. Physics can't approach that right. It doesn't know how. All it can really do is solve the easy problems, which are the correlates of consciousness. That's what brain science is finding out the correlates. But it never goes into the inner part, the experiential part. That part is subjective, by
Well,
nature.
yeah,
Right. I want to
physics
give
can't
credit.
actually do
Yeah.
anything. It can't actually study that, and this is why I get a little bit confused when people start talking about things like the personal experience, or about
Hmm.
the spirituality, or just anything about the human experience itself, and then they start quoting theoretical physicists and things, and you're like, well, just
Yeah.
why? What? I mean, yes, they might have some knowledge on it, and they might study it. It might be something that they're interested in, but that's not their field.
Yeah, that
They
there's
can
like
have an input on it, and
it, it's just.
biologists and psychologists will use
Hmm.
theoretical physicists, especially in the quantum physicists,
It's
when
just
trying to
creative
explain
thinking.
certain things. But
Creative thinking. People want to
mm,
be creative in their thinking, and at the same time, the ironic thing is you can't sleep on that either, though, because like I said, Einstein dreamed up a lot of his theories. He actually they came to him in dreams. They came to him kind of out of the ether, so to speak.
Yeah, but I
I'm
mean,
sure there's a natural reason for it. I'm not saying that there isn't. I'm just saying that there's some things that are true, but we can't really understand how it works or why it works the way it does.
yeah, but
Um,
Einstein
yeah, well,
also
Freud
worked.
had a thing for that, didn't he? He was talking about the I can't remember the name he gave for it now, but he talked a lot about like sort of the different parts of the consciousness being,
hmm
the subconscious especially. So when you're going
Yeah.
to sleep, the subconscious is the most intelligent part of your consciousness,
Yes.
and that feeds through things that your conscious mind wasn't able to contemplate through the day, given
Hmm.
the fact that your conscious mind is dealing with a lot of other more mundane
Stimulus.
things.
Right.
I
Like
will
me
say
lurk,
that.
Not that I follow Freud. I'm just pointing out,
like me
you know,
lurking around
Freud's
Walmart
idea.
in my underwear.
I've called into the atheist experience plenty of times to speak with Matt Dillahunty, and
Mm.
I've questioned him on the definition of like words like supernatural, spiritual, and he said he didn't believe in the spiritual because he's never seen an example of it. And it is a word that has a lot of connotations, and it could mean a lot of different things to many people.
Mhm.
But the area of focus that I primarily take my time on is all the neuroscience being done relative to like mystical experience. And they have a kind of a little bit more pinpoint way to describe what they might call a spiritual experience. And they can back it with fMRI, and so you're not just talking about these various tales and religious folklore going off in rabbit holes. You're trying to map it to something that's a little bit more concrete. And I like taking it in that direction, because my inspiration for these type of discussions has been my own mystical experience. I've had these experiences for myself, and when you do when they do happen, you kind of get this impression that there is a kind of a background consciousness to the entire universe, to the
Mm.
multiverse. That like a default, and that it's something that it's not exclusive to me. It's something we all can potentially experience if we engage one of these spiritual disciplines, whether you're taking 5 dry grams of mushrooms or you're engaging in deep meditation. There is something you can tap into that seems to be I would say like a background consciousness, or they call it the overmind,
There's the
Can I
language.
just?
There's the language that throws off skeptics and
Hmm.
secularists and atheists and people like that. I'll show you. I'll tell you why.
Mhm.
When you say that it's the consciousness backdrop, or kind of like this background processing consciousness
Mhm.
in the universe.
Yes.
See, this is where the leap comes in, because you have to understand every one of us are a universe unto ourselves. You are an entire experience from the time you were a child, and everything you've ever experienced, everything you've ever done in life, all the potential you have in your mind, all your identities, all the cascading consciousness that exists within you that you're not even aware of because they're going on in the background, right? So when you go through some sort of trip, like I did, like with DMT and stuff like that, you do have this feeling of some greater uber consciousness over
Mhm.
everything, like this cosmic mind. But that's in your universe. It's in no one else's but yours, because yours is the only thing that exists, right?
Well, I don't necessarily see it that way. Going back to like Einstein's block universe, I agree with
Mm-hmm.
you that we can be embellished in our own universe of our own, inside our own unique consciousness,
Mm.
one of us. But nevertheless, it's still going back to this notion of the block universe. It's we're all various and unique vantage points from that same whole.
Yeah,
And
and it's eternal. I understand that. I understand the B theory of time, that all of our experiences are actually eternal experiences. They're
mhm,
infinite. It goes on forever and ever and ever, according to the B theory of time. If you take that serious, which you have every reason to, because that's why we have GPS devices and other stuff that,
mhm.
like gravity waves and all this stuff that
Yeah,
was
sure.
predicted out of it. So it's gotta something about it is working, at least to make novel testable predictions about the future. So yeah, I understand what you're saying. In a way, that's sort of consistent with the DMT trip. Um, but I'm just saying that if that was true, though, there's no way to act. We still have no way to explain how that works. Like there's no bridge, there's no connection. Like um, if this experience is a spiritual thing that has nothing to do with matter and energy,
Hmm.
then then what are we really pointing to? We're pointing to the universe still, this thing that only makes sense to the 10 to the minus 33 centimeters. I mean,
Well, I,
there's
I think
Can
it.
I just jump in and ask a
yeah,
question?
Go ahead.
sure.
It's a question that I've been wanting to ask you, Cafe, from what you said before. So, how would you go about telling the difference, differentiating between, say, a chemical consciousness, which can be altered through chemicals, whether that be
Right.
self-induced chemicals within the brain itself, or whether it be, like you said, taking mushrooms or something like that? How would you differentiate that from this universal sort of consciousness thing?
Right.
How
I,
would you
I
tell the
don't think
difference?
there's a distinction there. I think there's many paths to the same goal. In other words, when you talk about bombarding your mind with DMT or engaging in a deep meditation or a near-death experience, each one of those roads lead to the exact same place.
But
So
aren't you making a leap there? Because like we have evidence that chemicals exist within the brain, and that and we can categorically show that the different chemical combinations and things like that can produce and different electrical, obviously by self-inducing stuff with electrical impulses. We can show that different experiences can be made to happen. So we know that these exist within the brain. But isn't
no,
it? We have
I,
no
I,
evidence that
I
there's any
wouldn't
sort
deny
of
that at all.
universal thing.
I,
So, what evidence do you have that there's this
I
universal
well,
thing?
a lot of the professionals that I follow, their speculation in engaging in these type of studies where they study, mystical experience, whether induced by psychedelics or whether induced by contemplation, like in the case of the Carmelite nuns. Their speculation that they come to is that in your own brain, you have NN-DMT, dimethyltryptamine, and it's produced. It's identical to what they're taking with ayahuasca. So it's essentially the same thing. In other words, your own brain produces this. The whole reason why psychedelics have an effect at all is because it mimics your own natural neurochemistry. So
Yeah, but again, that doesn't answer the question, does it? How you like sort of you're saying that there's some sort of something universal that we tap into that's outside of our own experience of who like is outside of ourselves.
No, I think a lot of that comes down to semantics, and a lot of people can get easily confused because inside these experiences, when you're undergoing them, it's not a matter of like something outside yourself or something inside yourself. The boundary between those two aspects completely dissolves. This
Oh,
is
you're
why the mystics
monist. Yeah,
talk
you're
about
a
all.
monist. Yeah, you're a panpsychist, so they're monist. Okay,
Yeah.
that's right. So
Mhm.
there's actually the reason he's saying that, Katie, is because it's kind of like Russellian monism, where
Non-duality.
yeah, the non-duality. There's no separation. That's all an illusion.
Mhm. Yeah, and so yeah, I think the confusion sets in for a lot of people is especially if they haven't had this type of experience. They've never had the breakdown between their subject object dichotomy, which is our everyday experience and our everyday natural waking consciousness. We wake up, we feel like we're an entity, we're anthropomorphic, moving about through our day, and you never have a break between that dichotomy of self and other, and inside these so-called transcendent experiences no such boundary exists. It dissolves into complete unity.
Well, yeah, and me and Josh were talking about that interface theory of consciousness. That we have that because of that. Our interface, gives us that simplistic, picture, kind of like a video game, kind of like a
Or yin
computer
and yang.
desktop. Yeah,
Yeah.
that way we know how to survive better in the world because we can make. There's different energies out here, and we've got to
Well, I mean,
distinguish between what is what. And so our brain evolved in order to filter that information out and process it in such a way that we can
Okay, I see what you're
evolve
saying.
and change, and
Yeah.
survive and
Mm.
thrive as a species. But even that is true only within a certain framework. Even that has to change as we get deeper and deeper into this conversation of reality.
Right, but I think the circumstances that I think what Katie is trying to say, which I agree with,
Hmm.
is that all these at the moment are just postulates. All these are just speculations
Yeah,
that we're trying to
think
get
thoughts.
to
Could you
the
just quickly
bottom of.
recap what went on? I completely dropped out. My entire internet went off.
No, no, no,
Oh,
no. It's perfectly
Yeah.
fine. I think Cafe was just explaining, based on a more monist position, that the sense of duality, I think, therefore I am, kind of dissipates.
Mhm.
And then what ends up happening is that you are connected with the everything in and of itself. If I got you correctly.
No, yes, and we talk about ignorance, and I love emphasizing the yin and yang because it represents these two dualities very perfectly.
hmm.
The white side, the black side, and we can talk about ignorance, and we can talk about us not being aware of these other realities and what our subconscious is, whatever's going on in there. But at the height of these experiences, what a lot of people describe throughout history, all these mystics, sages throughout the ages, the reason why I think they give these attributes to the divine, such as like omniscience, when this fusion happens, there is, it's almost like mystery is sucked out of life. There's nothing that is that everything is known at that point. There's nothing that is unknown, and but it only occurs in that specific transcendent state where you're in a trance. You can't reside in your ego at the same time as being in that trance. Like if we're omniscient here, there would be no reason for this discussion because you would already know what I'm going to say.
Right, but I think one of the main issues, right, and that's why, and I think we've had that conversation on the
Mhm.
show based on mystics and everything like that, is because when we describe mystics, there are many different mystics which are out there. There are mystics of destruction, there are mystics of peace, there's mystics of love, and everything like that. So unless we're looking at things more of like a Carl Jung type of way, where it's
Yeah,
like everybody has these particular aspects which they are the harbingers of,
yeah,
in particular, or the catalysts of, then it kind of seems that a mystical experience again is based on the subjective. It's not based on anything that is objective or monist. Because if somebody can go and take, let's just say, DMT, or somebody can take ayahuasca, for instance,
Mhm.
and then have this apocalyptic vision of a coming kingdom or whatever, and somebody else who takes it sees it more as like, oh, okay, we will reincarnate, and through there we'll slowly reach to that level of enlightenment, which is completely
Yeah,
different from the other angle, which is an apocalyptic happening in
yeah.
my time type of thing, to this takes aeons in order to actually achieve, right? So my question to you is that where, from these differentiations, how can we say that things are monist in these particular ways?
Okay, well, I think there might be hidden assumptions right there because the way I fathom this, you kind of gave the implication that this ultimate vision, this ultimate spiritual vision, is unique in some sense. It's subjective to each
Mhm.
individual. And I guess what I'm trying to argue, because I don't agree with that. I really think there's a universal phenomenon in consciousness that it's not unique to.
Aren't you making an assumption there, though? You accuse Josh of
I
making an
may be.
assumption.
You can say I'm making an assumption, but I think the science backs it up.
Okay.
And when they talk about the complete mystical experience, they're not talking about a subjective experience to the individual. And the reason I think it's very hard to speak on these subjects, religion, one of the hardest. Even Einstein said it's like the toughest topic to tackle, to even try to get these ideas out. And I think one misconception that a lot of people have is that this like, for instance, the mystical experience, it does occur on a spectrum. And if you have like if you meet a criteria on the lower end of the spectrum, meaning that, so they have 6 criteria that they go by, and if you hit maybe 2 or 3 markers, the experience can be very unique to you. Like if you grew up Christian, you might see Christ on the cross. If you grew up Hindu, you might see Ganesh. But it's still operating within the subject object dichotomy, where you're relating to some imagery that's very important to you. But when you advance beyond that, and you go where you're hitting all 6 criteria, that no longer exists. There's no longer the subject object dichotomy. You're not relating to Christ. You are Christ at this point. It's a dissolution to such.
Yeah, that's that study from John Hopkins University,
Yes.
right? Yeah,
Yes.
I read that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
But at that point,
sorry,
don't we
go
have to
ahead.
sort of bring in imagination there as well? I mean, we already know that the human brain can come up with things that has never existed before.
No, sure, but you see, the imagination, I think, comes into play on these lighter mystical experiences where you're still, adhering. Like I'm not very religious when I was younger, and when I first had this experience, I didn't have a vision of Christ. I had a vision of Bill Hicks, the comedian, and and I think the experience at that level can be very unique to your psychology and your upbringing and every aspect about you. But there is a certain threshold that when you exceed it, this is why they talk about the heroic dose. You no longer can hold on to anything, not even your individual self, your identity, your ego. That's why they call it ego death. There's nothing there that you can cling on anymore, because now it's become this universal, encompassing thing that I'm at great pains to say that we all have the potential for. And the greatest, I think the greatest thing out of it is one thing I always failed to mention. I think I didn't bring it up on our talk, Joshua.
Okay.
Is that one thing aside from all these very profound transcendent descriptions of like all time collapsing into the moment, past and future, so on and so forth. One thing that stood out was unconditional, infinite love for everyone and every being, no matter what. And I had a glimpse of that. And once I tasted that, I can no longer hate any one of you guys. I love you to death.
Yeah, no, the impression lasts. When I took DMT, you have that long afterglow after you have such a profound experience. It's like really deep and heavy, and it lasts for a lifetime, and it shows the meaning and that you can derive from it, and the you have to experience it for yourself to actually understand what anybody would be trying to explain. But the thing about
a similar effect on heavy doses of salvia as well, which I've taken in the past. Yeah.
And there's all kinds of correlations we can make about why the experience happens and all of that kind of stuff. Obviously. But you have to understand fundamentally what we're talking about is, if someone asks you, well, what's the scientific evidence that you encountered any sort of cosmic consciousness or anything that's pervading the universe and this and that and this and that? The thing is, that's just the wrong question, because science can't even explain a normal conscious experience. Like I said before, people got on the stage and someone says, please explain explain the taste of vanilla. And they couldn't do it. That no one on the stage, they all just laughed, because it was so ironic, like we're the experts up here talking about, oh, well, consciousness is explained this way and this way and this way because of this theory and that theory. And,
definitely.
And then when asked just a direct question, okay, well, forget all that. Just explain the color of the taste of chocolate or vanilla.
How do you blue your eyes? How did you brown your eyes? You did that yourself.
But I think that that's the number one thing too, and that's why I love philosophy as well, right? Because science is based on the more technical aspects, but when you start delving into the deeper than the technical aspects, then it starts getting complicated. We know that there's definitely the taste palettes. Everybody's taste palette is different in and of itself, but that's because we all have different states of qualia, which is subjective in and of itself. So that's why I love chocolate. I don't know, maybe somebody else might despise it because of how bitter it tastes. There are certain people that love 100% cocoa chocolate, which I can't even fucking stand. But the idea in and of itself is that these are subjective experiences because we are subjective individuals and we are one subjective self. Now, the one thing that I argue about constantly, because one of the things that I was doing within anthropology and even archaeology is understanding that kind of cultural barrier. Why does ayahuasca have such an effect on people? Why do these experiences happen in the first place? And a lot of times what seems to be the case, and that's why the effects of that love and of that compassion starts to dwindle afterwards, because it only has a certain effect on your brain for a certain amount of time, and that's why people need to retake the actual
Not necessarily. No, I would disagree with you a little bit, Joshua. We've discovered neuroplasticity. So what happens is when you have these strong these psychoactive agents in your mind, they can actually remap your brain just on one dose. Now they're looking at microdosing as like a way of changing people's curing depression, things like that.
Yeah,
and they say
I read the study they were doing that with magic mushrooms, weren't they?
Yeah.
Microdosing
what do you know about that, Katie?
psychoclobing.
Well, I would say it's a half truth. I would agree with you and Joshua at the same time, because there are individuals that are drastically changed and they'll never touch a cigarette again. They're no longer depressed. Their fear of death is gone from being terminally ill, so on and so forth. But I think I'm a living example of someone who's taking high doses, and yet here I am still vaping away and drinking alcohol.
Yeah.
Right.
The thing I struggle with, though, and this is the bit that I still haven't, I'm not understanding, and maybe it's just me being stupid or something on this, but I'm still not understanding how we can make a leap to it's something outside of ourselves. It's something which is universal, which is built into the thing. When
I think
all of the evidence points to it's still
your
still being us.
difficulty, I think, lies in that you're searching for something outside, and I think that's the wrong question to ask.
Well, this seems to be the argument that you're making.
You've
said multiple times
Yeah.
that you're talking about something universal. You even explained our consciousness as something like a radio receiver.
Yeah.
Where we're picking up something that from outside of our outside of our brain, sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a materialistic sort of.
Yeah, well, okay.
So I'm just struggling to see what led you there, how you got there.
Let me see if I can try to put it in perspective. I was invited recently to, now that's debatable, I don't know if you've heard of those guys, AAA, and they invited me to their podcast, and we got into the discussion, and they wanted to pinpoint me. It's like, okay, was it coming from the outside or is it inside us? And I think that's a false dichotomy.
You're saying that there is no outside and
right.
If we're talking about a radio, you think the radio signal only affects outside or inside? It interpenetrates all. And the way the physicists talk about it, Scott mentioned quantum mind. The quantum mind is the notion that we can't use classical mechanics to describe consciousness. We have to leap towards quantum imposition, quantum effect, quantum mechanics to explain for consciousness. And so David Bohm was very famous for this idea of non-locality. And a lot of people who delve into the idea of quantum mind, if they want to go further than classical mechanics to try to explain consciousness, then non-locality naturally comes up. And what is non-locality? It's not by non-local. It's not outside you. It's not inside you. It's everywhere.
Have you guys are you guys familiar with that brain experiment that was conducted last year, I think around November, that suggests that consciousness relies on quantum entanglement?
I haven't.
I read the paper.
That recent one, because I haven't heard of that one, but I would love to read about that. I love
Yeah,
reading about those studies. They, of course, they don't. It's all hypothesis. They don't claim to have it pinned down, but they put
Well,
forward,
they won a
their
Nobel
ideas.
Prize, didn't they, on that one?
oh, say that
Was
again,
it the
Katie.
same one? They won a Nobel Prize on that one, didn't they? Or they were nominated for the Nobel.
Oh, that was the
Oh, that was another one, was it?
yeah, that was a different one, but this one was just the experiment, and they used like anesthetic properties and isotopes of lithium spins, and they did an experiment with all that, and they were able to observe entanglement, and and they say that that's what kind of explains thoughts and decision making and experiencing things, experiencing the world, knowing the difference between the smell of garlic and the taste of chocolate, so to speak. Like, it's because of entanglement with
Yeah,
nature.
and spooky action at a distance. Like
Yes, and it is real weird. I mean, I can't even explain it. I wouldn't even try to
Well, I
explain.
mean, I like the way Terrence put it. He said, every interface or interaction between atomic chaos that was ever associated with each other retains that connection, no matter how far in time and space they become. So if you really believe in the Big Bang, then
Well, the only thing, as a spiritual skeptic,
Mhm.
I have to say that I don't get the I don't understand how they resolve the problem of time, space time being doomed. At the 10 to the minus 33 centimeters down.
Yeah.
That's the only part that
What do you
I'm
mean
not
by
getting.
doomed? Like,
Yeah, most physicists say that space time is doomed. That's
you're talking about the big freeze?
No. I'm talking
Or is it
about
the
our
Big Bounce?
understanding. No, our paradigm, our
Mhm.
understanding of relativity, quantum mechanics is doomed. It's over.
Well, I mean,
But couldn't it just be our understanding that's doomed, not the actual thing
That-
itself?
yeah. Well, the way
Like,
Well,
I
because the reason why is because our thinking led us to wrong, or not really wrong conclusion. It's kind of like, say, Newton had a theory of gravity, or
yeah.
someone said that the Earth was flat at one point, right? It's not that they were necessarily wrong. It's just that you were able to add more to our understanding. And so
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
ideas are sort of not wrong. They're part of, one framework of describing reality. It's a framework thing.
Yeah. Well,
So
Well, yeah, and we're not even there yet. I mean, we don't have
the
a
way
theory of
I put
everything
that
yet. So
right.
is that Einstein's general relativity is a pretty much staple mark in physics right now, that no physicist can really leap past that unless they're willing to go down to quantum mechanics. And so they say that Einstein's equations break down when you get to the quantum mechanical level. And so that's one sense that these ideas are doomed.
Well, see, it's for example, like, if you're going to measure the position of, say, like a subatomic particle or something,
Okay.
like with real high resolution, then you have to use radiation or small, really infinitely small wavelength, just about, because quantum theory tells us that wavelengths shrink, their energy grows as it shrinks. So if you were actually going to go beyond the limit, the constraint of 10 to the minus 33, you'd burn a hole. There'd be so much energy directed, you'd create a little black hole. That's how singularities
Well, I mean,
are
that's
developed.
exactly why it breaks down. In other words, you can't pinpoint a certain subatomic particle because superimposition, it exists in all places simultaneously. That's where it gets into this freaky
You're
stuff.
talking about the universal waveform.
Well, no, you said how much energy would it take to pinpoint a subatomic particle in space and time?
To measure, you were at a high
measure it.
resolution, like to really
you see
measure it.
That very question in and of itself arises out of the assumption that you can measure a subatomic particle in space and time in some unique.
That's what I'm saying. That's
Yeah,
exactly what I'm talking. That's why I'm bringing it up, because
Yeah,
I'm trying to
yeah.
tell you that it's almost like, let's say you're watching like some sort of hologram, like a hologram. You can break the hologram image so far down with the pixelation, but at the end it's just going to be a photon of light. It's just going to be, and you can't get beyond that because nothing exists beyond that, that relates to that. But what they're saying in this case is it's kind of like that holographic principle that I'm mentioning, except they think that there is something beyond that.
Oh yeah, no,
And
I spend a lot of time, I Brian Greene, Sean Carroll, Michio Kaku, reading all these books, thinking that I'm going to get some sense of what's going on in the quantum mechanical world. And when you finally finish reading all those books, you realize that no one has any idea of what's going on.
It's like me and Josh say, they're just learning more about the interface.
Yeah,
they're learning more about the VR headset. The rookie mistake is that it's like we put on these virtual headset, and that's how we're navigating this reality. All they are they're just objects that we're perceiving. So we're looking at the perception, not the real thing itself. So all we're really learning about is more of the VR headset, but we're not learning about the transistors,
Well, I think that's what mathematics is, though. Mathematics is learning of those transistors, understanding what makes the very essence of science or of physics what it is and what quantum mechanics.
But mathematics is more powerful than spirituality in that sense because it's a language that's much more rigorous. It's a language that actually you can get back exactly what you put into it.
I agree with that, except we have people like Kurt Gödel come along and talk about the hidden variables inside mathematics.
Gödel's incompleteness theorem.
Yeah, the incompleteness theorem. And I've heard, if you really posit like something like many worlds theory, for instance, I've heard physicists say things like the spin on the electron of an atom is traversing not only our universe, but every infinite universe out there. And so everyone gets a glimpse and it's moving so fast that it looks static, But it's operating in every infinite universe that is out,
Right. And, I admit that's just hypothetical. It's based on string theory, and it's also based on that matter and energy is fundamental, and it's just another one of those ones that want to violate the constraints that we have, but we know that it's hard to get behind that.
I really like your interest in the relationship between matter and energy and consciousness, because that's one trilogy or that I've been contemplating since as long as I've been thinking about these topics. And
and I mean consciousness, I know this is going to sound really weird, so I'm going to throw another really wild spiritual idea.
I'm listening, man, but I'm going to say 1 second.
Let's see, I want to hear Josh what he's got to say about this one. All right, so I would say maybe consciousness doesn't even exist at all.
Oh, actually, I would completely agree with that. I think that consciousness in and of itself is a word that we utilize in order to map out our awareness of our surroundings. I think that consciousness in and of itself, and even the subconscious, is kind of like two of the same entities in and of themselves based on how we are interacting with the world. And where I think mystical experiences come from is lost memories from observing certain things, reading certain things, engaging with certain things, and from there they're lost within the subconscious. And then sometimes when you're able to take DMT or whatever the situation is, it gets rid of or momentarily phases the barrier, whatever that barrier may be.
But
And
here's a
from
real
there-
As a person who studies psychology, I would actually agree with that as well. So I'd agree that consciousness doesn't really exist. It's just an illusion which we experience. It's just
more
an
like a
output
process.
from the programming that we have. So I like to think of it more like a computer. So you've got your hardware, and then you've got your operating system. You've got your hardware, then you've got your binary code and everything.
What really exists.
Then you've got the thing. Our consciousness is just the software. It's just the operating system that we all experience. Now, if you
And, you know-
change the code slightly, you change the operating system.
Mhm.
There
And
you
that's
go.
what's happening when you're taking things like DMT and stuff like that.
I think it's kind of funny to say that in a sense, because it's like we're on NPCs right now, speaking to one another. It's the
Well,
we're all
technically, we are in a
philosophical
sense.
zombies.
But that's the beauty of it, because I find that human beings love to make things complicated. They love to make things so complicated that it confuses the living shit out of everybody.
Everybody. Yeah.
So people are like, "What the fuck are you trying to tell me right now?" Right? But
Yeah.
the reality of the situation is that, like, if you start looking at it in certain ways, all of a sudden it's like, wait,
It dissolves away. The problem just
that's it.
dissolves
And it's
away.
like, that makes sense. We put so much emphasis on consciousness, and we put so much emphasis even more on the subconscious, that we're not really understanding the entity in and of itself and what makes that illusion so
Yeah.
powerful and
But
so
the
strong.
only question, you could maybe push back on about that, what I just said,
yeah.
like, is that, well, what are you delusional about? Like, who is being deluded? Like, who is the one who's having the illusion? Like, who's experiencing the illusion?
Yeah.
So this is what I'm saying about it not existing. So remember, I was saying that the only thing we really know is I think, therefore I am. We exist. So all there is existence. So that existence is the observer. So I guess the observer sort of is an ego self narrative story making up thing. That's why it's not true. That's why consciousness is not real. It doesn't exist, rather, because it's a construct.
Anyway,
it's an illusion.
I'm going to check out. So
okay.
All right, Katie, have a great one.
All right,
Thank you
Katie,
for coming on. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, it was a good meeting you, man. Thank you.
Yeah, all right. Let's catch you later.
All right. Talk to you later.
No, but I think the idea where a lot of people get confused, I think, is that they themselves, when they talk about consciousness, they're always reaching out for something that is beyond the brain in and of itself. They're always trying to act, or at least not act. I shouldn't say act, but they're trying to separate the brain in and of itself and the mind. They're saying that there's two different prospects here. But the reality that I see is that the mind in and of itself is only just information. It is nothing more than the information which is
processing,
been put into it. Exactly, and processed by it. And information in and of itself is physical. So when we're looking at the physical information which is being brought through an entire type of functionalist system. So it's not just like one part of the brain which is thinking, another part of the brain which is telling me to move my arm and everything like that. It's the entirety of the brain interacting as one kind of like synapses.
That's definitely how it seems. I mean, I can't deny that. Like, I'm definitely saying that that's exactly what we see when we look at it from an outsider's perspective. I mean, there's no denying it. That's obviously what's going on when we look at it. But the only problem is that, again, if we're saying that that's the ontological truth of consciousness, that it's the brain existing, then we've got a problem, because, again, space-time is doomed. Like, like, all I'm saying is, I'm not saying that's not real or that's not valid. What I'm saying is there's a deeper truth to it we're trying to look at, that spirituality deals with, is that deeper truth in it, where science, we can agree with the science, and the science observations are obviously true, and we can obviously go along with it and explain it that way, make account for things. But there's also that's only within that framework of speaking on it, whereas there's this underlying problem where we now know that there's this greater reality that can explain matter, energy, and consciousness. And we have to
add something to the conversation. I like what you're saying, man. No, you were talking about an egoic narrative, and you could extrapolate that to the point where even the model of the NPC or the philosophical zombie is part of that narrative.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you're undermining consciousness itself. Consciousness is the most intimate thing that we all know to our very being. It's of course it's emphasized.
We attributed to that.
It's yeah. Well, I mean, it's part of our everyday experience. Like we're experiencing
It's
consciousness.
our awareness.
Yeah, it's our awareness. It's how we experience ours.
Yeah, but that's what I'm trying to say though, is that the awareness of a particular thing in and of itself makes that experience much better, obviously. But the one thing is that when you're saying that the consciousness in and of itself is the reason why this is happening, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that
and I wouldn't necessarily agree with that either. I would agree with you. I don't think I don't think
you're a panpsychist, so
yeah.
So basically, he's going to be with you, Joshua. He's basically going to say consciousness exists within matter and energy. So he's with the whole thing. But what I'm saying, where I'm kind of deviating a little bit, is you're saying like, so let's say what Cafe is saying, that there's consciousness. So where does that come from? Some deeper thing. So what he's saying, it comes from the energy of the universe, essentially, right? Panpsychism. But then what Joshua was saying is, no, where consciousness is coming from is the brain. So what I'm saying is it's going even beyond where both of y'all are pointing to. I'm saying it's right. Even beyond that.
But actually, I would even state that consciousness is an emergent process. I wouldn't say that consciousness is anything within the universe itself or anything like that. It's an emergent amalgamation of biological organisms coming together and slowly but surely through that amalgamation becoming more and more and more sentient, not because it's learning new things, but it's because of the stimulus which is coming in and our ways of adapting to that said stimulus in and of itself.
But those mechanisms wouldn't work without what?
Hold on, could you repeat that? My apologies.
But those mechanisms that you're pointing to, like the conglomeration you're talking about, the emergentism, all of that wouldn't be possible without what? What came before that?
Well, without the physics behind it, without the
biology. The physics, the well, no, not the biology. The biology, or even what tells the biology what to do.
Well, that's the chemistry back up further.
Right.
Then you get the physics. Then
you get the physics, and then you go all the way up to the laws of the universe. And the laws in this case are prescriptive, not descriptive. These are the laws of the universe, like the brute fact of how reality works, right? So this thing is what I'm also pointing to as when I say I think, therefore I am. Before I start thinking and creating this self and creating this ego and all the explanations for everything, there's just this neutral. You could call it like this. Maybe a good analogy would be like the oneness I'm talking about is the lake, just a real smooth big lake, and then your thoughts are like ripples in the lake, but the ripples aren't the lake. Like I couldn't take the ripple out and take it anywhere, or do anything with it. It's what the lake's doing. Right,
that's
a process.
Eastern metaphor, man.
Right.
Gurus use that. They talk about the ocean and the wave.
Right, and this is a very naturalistic accounting for consciousness that doesn't need any sort of supernatural gods or anything like that. But the problem is when you're a materialist, if you're coming at it from a materialist point of view, the problem with that is, well, you're not letting me. I don't see the lake. I see the brain, but where's the lake? I see the matter and energy, but where's this lake you're talking about? Like, where's the evidence? It's almost like God of the Gaps or Lake of the Gaps or whatever. Like,
I wouldn't
you know what I mean?
necessarily call it that. But the one thing that I would say, because I can kind of when I'm hearing both of you speak, I can kind of understand where you're going with it. The only problem that I have is that through the speculations that we're all having these speculations. I'm not just saying just both of you, even myself. We're all having speculations based on where consciousness has come from. The reality and the problem of that is that there's nothing that indicates that this is the case whatsoever on anybody's point of view.
Well,
right?
I would disagree. If I were to finish, like when they say, "Where's the lake? Can you show me this oneness where the ripple comes from?" You don't need it. It's so obvious. I think, therefore I am. You know, before you
Yeah,
start
but
thinking,
there's
there's
something
this, you
more
exist.
of a fundamental than that, though, because it's not only just the existence of a particular thing, because just like how Kant even stated, existence in and of itself can't necessarily be the four
Yeah.
core.
Oh, to add this, I have the perfect thing, Joshua. He said, "I think, therefore I am." So is that to say, if I do not think, therefore I am not? You know, like,
Right. You wouldn't be able to, well, yeah, you would not, because,
and you know, so
um,
the
yeah,
gurus, yeah, the mystics, you know, they engage. Meditation is all about doing away with thoughts, volition.
hmm
You know, completely going back to this default mind that we're talking about. You know,
right.
before any thoughts come into play at all, before philosophy even as a wink, you know, glimmer in your eye. You know, there's this default mode that seems to encompass, you know, all aspects of being, and that's kind of the way I see it. Like you were talking about earlier, like you kind of were suggesting that the relationship between matter and energy and consciousness, that consciousness seemed to be transcendent of even matter and energy, you know, and I'm not sure that's the case.
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is there's something
Something,
transcendent,
yeah,
something, and
whatever X,
whatever
whatever it
it,
is, yeah,
I don't even put any properties onto it.
yeah,
Like that would just be engaging more thinking and
mm,
more limitation. So
yes,
what I do is I just say that whatever it is, it's apparent to me. It's
yeah,
apparent at a very basic level,
yeah,
and it's not something that I need to think about or even be convinced of. It's kind of like some would say, well, why do you think you don't want to kill your daughter? Why
yeah,
do you think that? Can you explain to me why? It's like, I don't have to explain that.
yeah.
I
It's
just
intuitively
know
there. Yeah,
that's
But it's
wrong.
not
It's
only just that too, because if we look at it through biological tendencies, the very thing, like, yes, don't get me wrong, sometimes when the brain isn't properly formulated or formatted, yes, there are people who take out their kids and stuff like that.
mm-hmm.
But the natural perspective of the brain is to protect your offspring in order for them to continue on within life. That's why for the longest time, whenever somebody took out somebody's offspring, it was literally like slaughter season for that
mm,
entire individual and everything like that. The one that did that type of action to that parent and stuff. And the idea, and that's why for me, when we're looking at it through a biological lens, and not only just through a biological lens, but through neurobiology in and of itself, that's why I'm such
Correct.
a behavioralist,
Well,
as I
see that.
stated.
Well,
On
that's this. This is where there. I think maybe there. You're not understanding me. Maybe
oh,
because
go ahead. Maybe
yeah,
I'm not.
because what that's exactly to my point. Like, because we see things through a filter of being a human species. Like, we're not a bat, so we don't see the world as a bat does. We see
Right.
the world as a human does, right? So
Okay.
you're saying that the thinking and all that, we can't really rely on it. So we could all be. But that's my whole point. Is that before you even get to that, before you even start to think about, all you have to do is think. And the fact that you are thinking equals exist.
mhm.
And so
Well, yeah, we would both
existence,
agree. We
so
would both agree to
that's the
that.
evidence, right? That's the evidence. That's the
But
strongest evidence that
I have a question though. When you say existence, what kind of connotation are we talking about existence? Are we just
man,
stating
it's
that you're in a state of just the exist? Or are
that's
you
the biggest
stating that
question. Now
there's
now
more of
you're
a
doing
metaphysical prospect to
now
you?
Million dollar question.
look at you, you're doing the spiritual stuff, Joshua. That's what I'm
I am
telling
not
you.
doing no
That's
damn
what I'm
spiritual
telling you,
thing.
man. You're doing it. Now you're doing it. See, and I
I am
told you
not.
that
Oh
is
That
my
the
is
god!
not
hardest.
asking
Oh, you guys are funny.
questions.
What you're asking me
Asking
is
questions.
now the question that when you finally start to do these things, this is the first question you start to ask. Like, that what is, is this existence? What are we talking about defining?
I'm
Do you know
doing
how hard that
philosophy, god damn you.
it's
Hey, listen,
ineffable?
I got something for you, man. No.
Yeah,
Okay, go ahead, go ahead. What do you got? What do you got?
I was messing around, but
yeah.
no, there was one point I wanted to bring up because I like your talk on the relationship between matter, energy, consciousness. That's very
hmm
interesting, man. It's something I've thought about for a very long time. I don't even think I come to any conclusions on that myself, but I do remember this quote just to liven things up, throw a joke out there. I think Terence McKenna said it. He said, "I love the illusion of Buddhism. It's the notion that transcendence can be transcended."
Yeah.
and like, but the way I like when we talk about like default consciousness, like the way Josh was saying, like, yeah, you might not murder your daughter, but that's not the generalized thing that the species will accomplish.
Right.
And so there's this very common notion, you've probably heard of it, the original division in Christianity, the original sin. You've probably heard that term, right? Original sin.
Oh yeah, of course.
And well, the way I've come to interpret original sin lately is that, if these mystics are having visions where there is a perception of a complete totality of all people and things, where their ego dissolves, they become, they no longer identify with the material body. Their identification is now one and the same with the universe itself. So they can't, they're not going to hurt themselves. So love your brother as you love yourself. They're not going to, and no sin would even occur because there's no division. That original sin is the original division. And as long as you have the perception that you're a separate entity from your brother, then all sin is permitted. Then I can steal from you, I can rape from you, so on and so forth. And I should have said great, but I don't want to.
No.
Well, yeah. Well, that goes to the oneness I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Is the thing is that we start thinking about these things, and that's when everything gets really. That's when it's just all opinion and inference, and we can be wrong, and we can be right, and we can be valid.
There's a difference, though. There's a difference. Like there is a difference between pure intellectualization and hypothesis, pure, just conjuring notions, versus
knowing.
Versus having this insight and basing all your knowledge.
That's what I'm trying. That's what I'm telling Joshua's analogy. The analogy Joshua gave, where they're similar is in the knowing part, not the explanation part. Like, see, like Joshua can say, well, there's a biological reason for why you're going to protect your daughter. You don't want to see your daughter get killed or anything like that. And what I'm saying is that's fine. What I'm saying, though, is that you know that you don't have to be told that.
But because it's innate already within the species itself.
Right.
And it's not just, but that's the thing. It's not just within the human species.
Right.
It's within any species.
Within any species, right. So where the analogies are the same is in the knowing part. So I can say, well, I know that there's this lake where the ego comes up as a thing. I know it. I don't have to explain it. I know it. Just like I know I don't want anyone to kill my family because it's innate in my species. I know it in the same way, but for different reasons.
I think that it's difficult, though, in order to state knowing, right? Because just like how I stated too, there are outliers to the equation, right? There are outliers, and let alone there are stresses which then create outliers as well. That's why people who are going through economic struggle might do crazy shit that if they weren't going through economic struggles and stuff like that, wouldn't have done in the first place.
Well, can I bring up a distinction? Or go for it. Finish that thought. I want to add to what you're saying.
Right. So I think that inside these type of understandings, it's not just like how I think of inside, it's how I'm interacting with the outside, which is influencing the inside of how I'm engaging my environment. Yeah. Go ahead, Tiffany.
Yeah, what you said relates very much so to, of course, the golden rule, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with. And one distinction that I hear often when I engage in forums and stuff, I sometimes I try to debate with atheists. I stopped doing it because I don't know, man. I love talking to y'all better. This is much more productive. But anyway, the distinction.
See, this is why spirituality and skepticism can get together. I'm telling you. I'm telling you. Well, see how productive this is?
Yeah. Here's my point. A lot of materialist types, atheists, if you will say that they have like a slogan or a catchphrase, "Good without God." And a lot of the books you read on basic morality, especially if you read like Sam Harris, they will emphasize empathy, and they'll use that as a basis to create a certain like relative morality, out of that basis. And that's all fine and well, you might have atheists who donate to charities, and they go out, do community service, and so on and so forth. But my point with the mystic is the mystic who's someone who, if this background consciousness exists and they dissolve into it, it's infinite unconditional love. And at that point, you're a saint, you're a mystic. You're not at this empathy level where I'm gonna gauge of like how, I'm gonna make bets on what I want to do, engage whether I want to participate in this and not participate in that. For the mystic, that doesn't exist because they don't identify as the material body. They're at one with awe, and that background consciousness that I've been trying to emphasize, that I really believe both of y'all can access, is filled with infinite and unconditional love. And that's where this mystic, the saint, speaks from. That's where Jesus, is coming from. That like they're going to come at you from that attitude, from that psychology.
Right, but I think the issue where this is where I kind of look at it in a more total.
I would love to hear this, man.
Right?
Hell yeah!
Because like, you don't get me wrong, I do understand that even though people would argue, is Jesus' thought process original, or was it something that was already kind of in flux during that time with other
background that he was tapping into?
Right, exactly. And all in all, nobody can really know. Nobody can really know. There are certain people that say, yes, he was somebody who was revolutionary. Other people said, no, he just copied the ideas from other individuals. Whatever the case may be, that's perfectly fine. But we need to look at individual, and that's why I think that we got to look at individual mystics in and of themselves and what they actually spoke of.
No, I would love that.
And I think that when we really look at the totality of it, there are many different areas or whatever where people who claim to have a mystical experience, right? Because like, that's the thing. How do we know that a mystical experience is always a good experience? And how do we know that the outcome of a mystical experience will benefit everybody, for instance, right? Because what the tendency of Jesus's mystical experience, right? So there would be some people that would say it was good. Other people just like one's parents and stuff like that. If one loves one's parents more than they love me, then they're not my disciple, and so on and so forth. Which then makes you think of, what the hell is that? I wouldn't even follow anybody if they stated that to me. I love my family. But anyways, that's besides the point. The idea is that the mystic in and of themselves, because they believe they have some sort of higher message, right? And that they're relaying that higher message to the rest of the people. The only thing that I keep hearing with mystics is, follow me and leave everybody else behind.
Yeah. Well, you see that, I would say that's unique to you because
but how so? If you read the Bible, I mean, if you read the Bible and you read even the Quran and you read these type of things, there's that distinction between the other.
I know it was a while back, and maybe I'll refresh your memory, but I can tell you that I was influenced by Terence McKenna to try the heroic dose. And like I wasn't trying to get into anything spiritual or some kind of deep religious study or anything like that. I was just curious to what it's like to hallucinate on a very high dose of mushrooms, a very childlike, kind of immature gratitude like that I was looking for. And I had no idea what I was getting myself into, so when I took that, I was 23 years old. And what it did was it launched. So I had the ego, like complete ego death, full blown ego death. Unifying vision with all that is, And when I came down from that, it inspired me to study comparative religion. And so, like, when you talk about, various mystics and, their attitudes, the mystics that I study, because in my religious studies, I focus on mystics. I love hearing the poetry, the writings of mystics, Saint Teresa of Avila, Anthony the Great, Simeon the New Theologian. Like, I can list on and on. And what I found was that they don't see it as exclusive to themselves. That even having this vision, they saw it like beyond themselves, to the point where I think I tried to mention it last time, where like the Holy Spirit, the direct revelation of the Holy Spirit with Christianity is one and the same with the nirvana of Buddhism or the samadhi of Hinduism. It's the same exact phenomenon in consciousness. It's a phenomenon in consciousness that's been going on for millennia. And that's kind of where I landed, because I started reading the writings of these mystics, and I wasn't only just like reading their material, I was resonating, because I had experienced it myself, so, what they were writing, I was like, holy shit, this is exactly what the fuck I experienced. Like,
Can I share an experience
yeah,
that
go for it.
you're going to think I'm crazy? In fact, as I share this experience, I don't want you guys to believe me. Like, I don't want you to think it's true. Okay?
Okay.
Because it would be, if you did, it would be for bad reasons. But I believe it myself, or I believe something.
Okay.
And I'll kind of explain what's going on. So, this is really weird, sounds really crazy. So, my sister was washing dishes at the house, and what she does, and we always know this, is she always carries her phone everywhere, right? So she puts her phone face down onto the kitchen sink, or this little island we have in the middle of the kitchen, right? She puts her phone down face down. She always does that because she doesn't want to get it cracked or spill anything, because she's always got drinks around and shit. But anyway, she was cooking, so she's got her back to the island in the middle of the kitchen. Phone's face down. She's cooking. She comes back, picks up the phone to make a phone call, and her picture's on there of her cooking at the stove. It's like somebody came in, picked the phone up, but the thing is, it was 3 a.m. Everybody was asleep, and it was just her and my mom and dad were over there, and they were dead asleep. There's nobody in there. So she doesn't lie about stuff like that. Like,
Yeah.
So anyways, and what was so bad, it wasn't even a file. It was a screensaver on her phone. So it didn't even take a picture, like where it became a file on her phone. But my brother figured out a way to save it to a file. So
Yeah.
he put a USB, saved it to a file, and when they looked at the picture, it's inverted. So even if you picked the stove and everything was in the wrong area, like it was on the opposite ends.
Yeah.
So the picture was inverted somehow.
Well,
So
I mean, it is.
how do
freaky.
you explain
Well,
that shit?
I'll tell you, it's freaky because you're over here, like juggling topics like panpsychism and saying that, I've traversed this, I contemplated it, and I reject it, and yet you're over here at the same time talking about this other. Very, like, instead of seeing this as like, oh, maybe she took an accidental picture with the flip of her camera, like, accidental
No,
touch.
my conclusion is very simple. My conclusion is I don't know the answer.
Yeah. But
Like,
I
because
mean,
look at it this way. Let's look at all the likely candidates of explanation. It could be somebody came in the room, took her picture, and ran away, and somehow did it to invert it, and only as a screensaver on the phone. Somebody knew something about phones to be able to do that, snuck in, took the picture. Highly unlikely, because
what kind of
nobody
phone
was in
she
the
had?
house. That would be insane to think that actually happened at 3 a.m. They're the only ones in the house.
Do you know the kind of phone she has?
It's like a Samsung, I think.
You know, Samsungs have a Bluetooth pen that you can press the button and take a picture. Like,
Oh,
and she has
really?
Ultra. Yeah,
Yeah.
if she has Ultra, that's the case. You know,
No,
like
she doesn't have that though. She
okay,
doesn't have
all
that.
right, all
It's
right,
like
all right.
some old. It's actually an
I
old
used to
phone.
work in retail with phones. I used for Verizon, AT&T,
Yeah.
mobile
So
phone.
that would be a candidate explanation. That could be a candidate explanation that there's a pin, but based on what I know, that's not the case. So that's kind of a low percentage.
All right.
Then it could be a ghost, but then how do you explain ghosts? That just creates more mysteries.
Well, what about the
So it's
one
like,
I told you, like the accidental
well,
touch?
right. Well, hold on just a second. Or it could be, if we're going to postulate ghosts, then we could say, well, how do we know it's not a glitch in the matrix? Okay, how do I know if it's not a between whether ghost or glitch in the matrix? How do I tell the difference? I don't
Well,
know. Um,
you
then
already
you've got
figured it out.
other. Yeah, it's like it could just go. The point that I'm making is it could just go on and on. You could come with infinite
Yeah.
amount of explanations, aliens, time traveler. I mean, it goes on and on and
Well,
on, right?
no, here's my question to you. Why are you so skeptical of this event? But when it comes to panpsychism, no, I know where I stand. You know what I mean? Like
No, but
Uh,
the thing is that I think is based on people's disposition as well, right? Like, there's a lot of people that say that, oh, okay, I'm an atheist, but at the same time, before being an atheist, I was spiritual, right? So you already have a connotation of the spiritual. You already read, not you already
Mm-hmm.
read books, but the person already read books, already did that based on spiritual connotation. So when you
Mm-hmm.
have the experience, then what is your brain doing is that it's
Right.
recollecting everything together and just bestowing it upon you, and you're like, oh my god. And what's the number one thing that the brain loves to do? And definitely if you're thinking about Carl Jung, for instance, the brain predominantly focuses on what that person thinks about in and of itself. So if you were a
But you have to
peaceful
admit,
individual beforehand,
that's a really freaky
yeah, but I think that
thing,
it can
right?
be
Like,
multiple different things too. Like I think the first thing could be that just like how Cafe stated,
mm,
it can be by accident. Another thing is that I know that I've done shit like that beforehand where I thought I put the phone upside down, but I put it on its side. So
ah,
then after it can take the image and it can be inverted, and then
yeah.
whenever you start
ah,
flipping it back and forth, it'll just be inverted in
Well,
that particular way.
Joshua, let me ask
mm,
you this:
mm.
how many stories like Scott's have you heard?
I've heard a lot of stories like
Like
Scott, and
Scott?
let
Okay.
alone just because of like archaeology and anthropology in
Oh
and
no,
of
no,
itself.
no. I mean like dealing with like digital technology, like you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. There a shit ton. A shit ton.
Well, I want to say there's only like Scott when you mentioned that story, it reminded me. There's something my brother told me. Like he said, he claimed that he was watching the screen. He fell asleep, and there was a screenshot saved on the desktop that he knows for a fact, and he swears to this day that he didn't take. That it's
Mm-hmm.
just there, and it's I feel like Scott's story is kind of similar in that it's a technology, like something,
Thing, yeah.
that it's in the phone, like it's an anomaly, you can't explain it, you know.
No, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's an anomaly. I think that it's because how suspicious it is, we automatically jump to conclusions.
Well, now you're
But
offending Scott, man, because now you're saying you can explain it. Nah, I'm playing around.
Yeah.
I'm playing around.
I'm not
But
saying, because like that's the thing, right? It's the same as that thing as somebody like you've been inside your own place before. You're sitting down, the door opens up, right? Nobody's on the other side. The door opens up, and you kind
yeah,
of look at it, and automatically you think, "Oh, okay, is this the wind pattern? It's whatever. It's perfectly
yeah,
fine."
you,
Even if you have the door windows closed, you know that there's some more wind pattern that comes through. It's not like you're blocking out the air, because then you would die of asphyxiation within your home. So there's obviously wind patterns and shit like that going through. Now, when you're watching something that is terrifying, let's just say like a horror movie, and then in the middle of the horror movie, that door opens up by itself, you're no longer thinking logically anymore. You're like, what the fuck is that? You put the thing
Yeah.
on pause, you're looking at the door, all of a sudden something starts to materialize in front of the door, you're terrified, your skin starts to fucking get goosebumps, your hair starts to stand up, and then all of a sudden your logical brain kicks in and then the thing disappears, everything like that, and then you start to fucking relax, right? Because the brain is the greatest thing and people's worst enemy. If your brain is fucked, it's your worst enemy completely. But
It's
if your
definitely good. It's definitely good to always consider the limitation of mind. You know, to understand that we are physical beings and we have limitations, and we're able to we hallucinate our normal reality anyways as it is, apparently, from
Well,
what
yeah, but
science tells us. So it is, you know, but at the same time, we have to have some sort of referent to understand what like a hallucination in reference to what, like
well,
what are we trying to
well,
point
for
to
me,
here?
for you, Scott, like for me, like the challenge in hearing you describe that was, you know, like I thought you were such a skeptic to the point where maybe, you know, Occam's razor, you're not going to consider anything outside like something magical, supernatural. You're going to look for, you know, a logical explanation, like I said, the accidental touch or something like that. But what you're saying, this event is so trippy that you can't.
I just don't know. I would
Something
say I
supernatural
don't.
might have been involved, right? You know, like that. That's the implication.
It could be, because here's the thing: when with my epistemology, one thing that I want to avoid in my epistemology is being 100% towards anything. So even if I may say, like, I'm a naturalist, like I believe the only thing that exists is nature, but
Yeah,
that's on a scale. That's not necessarily a 100% truth that I'm willing to die on a
yeah,
hill
yeah,
on. You know, it's like I have to be open to every possibility that
yeah.
may
Hey,
exist,
I'm
and
not criticizing you, brother. I love that about you, man. I love
yeah,
that you have that. You know, I think that's what makes you open minded, man. You know, like
yeah, that's what that's
if
don't
you
yeah.
get
were a
me
strict
wrong.
materialist, you'd be like, you would tell your sister, like, no, there obviously, you know, there was some trickery going on. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? Like
you're
something.
lying. Yeah,
Yeah,
No. But I think like there's multiple different situations, right? Like my father telling me a story based on his cousins or whatever, and my aunt or his aunt screams up and down that that this event happened and they were possessed by the devil themselves, right?
yeah,
That they walked up right into the freaking living room and then after started doing some really weird stuff and everything like that. And she swears up and down that they were
Oh, you've
possessed.
never seen
Up
the
and
devils,
down.
have you?
But for me, my number one thing is that I look at shit through the logic first. If logic can't answer it, then I start to look at certain other things, and then after I'm like, but hold on, do we know everything based on what nature has to offer? No. So even if you're looking at something that, let's just say, spirits do exist, that is underneath nature as well.
Yeah,
right,
Spirits are not separate from nature; they are part of nature if they
yeah.
exist.
right.
You know?
There's a funny meme where like it's like someone says I'm spiritual. He's like, the girl replies, "Well, demons are spiritual too. Be specific." You know, like, uh, but no. I absolutely agree with you, and I mean that's why I've always loved to talk to you. That's why, man. I the same open mindedness that that Scott represents. I feel like y'all have the same kind of like chemistry together. Like,
Yeah,
I think, you know, because like when you mention demons, man, like you probably never, I don't know if you've ever been an alcoholic in your life.
No, I
No.
haven't.
Well, in my mid 20s, dude, I was extreme alcoholic. I would have to literally drink till I passed out, dude. I wouldn't feel satisfied until I went unconscious, you know. And it took a toll eventually, like when I was around like maybe 27, 28. And I experienced something that I never even knew about alcohol. Have you ever heard of delirium tremens? You know, yeah, they're the withdrawal symptoms of severe alcoholism, and I had no idea what this was. You know, like I was, you know, and it wasn't from, you know, this is a withdrawal symptom, but I wasn't withdrawing. What happened to me was that I was working with T-Mobile. I was getting paid really good, and I was buying IPAs every single night. And when that contract ended, I had to downgrade to like a malt liquor or some shit. You know what I mean? Like I couldn't afford that same alcohol that I was buying. It was 13 ABV. It was high alcohol content. And so when I switched down, I went through a bout of DTs that I've never experienced before. And when I would close my eyes, man, at night, before I went to sleep, literally, dude, I would see demons like just staring me with pure hatred. Like they want nothing more for me to be just dead, you know? And I thought I was going nuts. I thought I was going crazy. And I went to Wikipedia. I found out what delirium tremens was. I had no idea what it was. You know, I had been drinking since 15, since I was 15 years old. You know, like and I got into this alcoholism. And when I found it, it gave me solace because I'm like, wow, you know, it's not just, you know, unique to me. There's these people that are witnessing the same things when they close their eyes, you know, that they describe as gargoyles and demons. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going fucking crazy. You know,
Right.
I thought that was it, man. I thought I was fucking dying.
Right. But see, like that's why I'm saying the things that I'm saying, though, right? Because when you slowly start to understand psychology and you can understand certain withdrawal system and everything like that, you slowly but surely can start to equate different types of hallucinations that individuals have based on certain interactions
chemicals.
that they have.
Definitely, yeah, I agree.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's why, for me, and it's not that like I completely get rid of it. No, there's no spiritual experiences. The thing that they constantly show that I see is that the brain does shit when it's in crisis mode.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes it doesn't even need to be in crisis mode. Sometimes, like, the brain just does stuff when it has too much DMT in it. And
here's something I could do. Here's something really interesting. I still know how to do it, but I don't do it anymore because my heart can't take it anymore. Like, I'm getting too old for this shit.
Yeah.
But when I was young, I learned how to bring on night terrors voluntarily. Like, night terrors are when people fall asleep and they have this thing sit on their chest and or demons visit them, or they get taken up to some medical observation room by some fucking demon or alien or something. And these sort of visions, I could bring them on at will.
Yeah.
And what I did was I used to work at the Virginia State Police, which was a big complex, like a big 4-story complex, right? And so I used to work the night shift there in the computer room. So to stretch my legs, I would get up and I would just walk around all the halls. Now, it's real dark, and there's all sorts of little ghost stories going around the offices. Like, oh, have you ever been there at night? There's a ghost in the hall. If you walk around those halls, you'll see a ghost and all this stuff. And it's kind of creepy. There's like real little weird noises going on, especially when you get to this particular floor. But at that floor is the nurses' station. And I used to go, and it's real creepy in the nurses' station. It looks like a fucking morgue, So I go in there, and it's real dark and everything. And it's creepy and scary. And it's late at night. It's like 3 a.m. So I'm trying to like take a nap. But every little noise wakes me up, and I'm scared. So I'm kind of like on edge. But I'm so tired and so sleepy.
Man,
I can't help it but go down anyways. So I'm in this little scary mode of sleepiness,
Right.
And I'm in that REM sleep, that REM sleep, where I'm kind of like in between states. I'm kind of conscious and I'm kind of. So now I can see my dreams in reality. They unfold. They actually have physical, feelings on me. Like they can touch me and stab me, and I feel it, like for real, And I used to bring this on purpose, because I couldn't help it. But then I learned how to hone it, so I could go home and sleep in my bed and do it there too.
Mastering lucid dreams.
Yeah, it's kind of like lucid dreaming, but night terrors.
Well, I mean, like the thing with the bout that I experienced is that, man, when I was going through this, it was almost like my body lost the ability to naturally fall asleep. I couldn't sleep, man. You know, so I was on edge all the time, man. Like I worked in retail. I was snapping at my coworkers, at my brother, at my, people, I don't even know,
man.
because I couldn't sleep, dude. Like,
Right.
it was almost, man, it was the ugliest feeling ever, man. It was almost like my brain forgot how to fall asleep.
Right.
And
right.
that was it, dude. That's it. I'm going to sleep. I'm going to die. I'm going to die now.
You'll die if you don't sleep. Yeah.
I'm like, shit, what the fuck am I supposed to do now? And so, like, man, I fucking, I prayed, I fucking meditated. I try to stop my thoughts. I'm like, man, this is, if I'm going to sleep at all, it's going to be through meditation.
Yeah.
Like, that's the only way I see me falling asleep. And, man, luckily, I went to my brother's house. He fucking told everyone to fuck off. Gave me his bedroom, and oh my god, I got fucking at least 6 hours, and that was all it took to come back, man. To try, to lift myself up. And like, I was like, oh my god, I thought that was it. I thought it was ending right there. Because I couldn't sleep at all. Like, there is no possibility of sleep, man. It's the scariest thing, dude. Man. You never want to experience that. I would never wish that on my worst enemy, man. Like, there is no possibility of sleep on the horizon whatsoever.
Right, wow. but that's what I'm saying though, is that when we realize how powerful the brain is and how beneficial it can be when it's working perfectly, and how horrible it can be when it's not. The idea for me is that then when I look at mystical experiences, my thing is that and I'm not saying you can't learn something from them. That's not what I'm trying to say. I just think that people put too much onuses on them in order to state that there's something more than there is.
Well, Joshua, I challenge you to that because I don't think you've had one yet. And you know what? I'm going to come to your house with about 17 grams of mushrooms, and we're going to do this right now.
One hit of DMT, and that would change everything.
Yeah. I haven't tried DMT.
That's the thing. In my younger years, I used to take the DMT myself and everything. I used to.
Man, I haven't tried DMT. That's why I've been looking for it.
I've had mystical experiences myself.
But
the problem is that I think that my brain, in and of itself, because of what I was able to learn inside school and everything like that, and let alone I was learning about mystical experiences and everything through archaeology, through what I was doing based on culture and stuff like that, and cultural behaviors of human beings while taking ayahuasca in South America. I understood what I had, and I was able to. I don't even know, because I felt the same thing that you felt. I felt that eternal love. I felt that feeling of being wrapped up in the warmest of blankets and loving for everybody and everything like that. But for me, that shit dissipated over time.
No, that's why when you mentioned it earlier, and when Scott disagreed with you, I was like, man, I have a lot of efficacy with these high doses and people, curing themselves with depression and so on and so forth. But yet, I think I'm some kind of exception, man, because I've had high doses, and here I am still struggling with these vices.
Right, but I mean, likewise on my end too. It's not for me, I'm still the person who I am, but it was through small transitions. Yeah. But I'm still.
Have you guys ever tried Dr. Jesus?
Dr. Jesus is the best.
I've been looking for him, man, this whole time, man.
Dr. Jesus will do anything for you, not some things. Not a few things.
Water to wine.
Everything.
Just get a 50-pack bottle of water bottles.
That's right.
Well, my favorite thing.
Actually, hold on. Before we continue, Mike, based on the conversation tonight, since you were here, what did you think? And also, what is your idea based on skepticism and spiritualism? Do you think that they can be reconcilable, or are they irreconcilable?
Well, they're certainly both reconcilable because they're both applications, and it all depends on what direction the applications take. I mean, one good example is Buddhism and the origins of it specifically, because at that time in history there weren't very many true atheists in the world, but when Gautama, the one who ended up being called the original Buddha, came along, his angle was not necessarily that the Hindu gods did not exist, but that, the kind of enlightenment that he was offering people, the middle path and all that, which was more about self-reliance and not abasing oneself to an exterior force, was a
Amen,
better
brother.
form of
Yeah,
enlightenment.
I like
So it
that.
was skepticism towards the message of Hinduism, that these gods are the only way. So
Hmm.
Hinduism comes in, or Hinduism, skepticism comes in many forms.
Very true, very true. Because being a skeptic doesn't mean that you're not religious or you're not spiritual. It just means that in and of itself, you are rejecting the form of religion or of spiritualism that you're coming from in the first place.
You may say that skepticism is one of the main modes that spirituality operates in.
You there with the goddamn spirit.
That
But yeah, no,
was an interesting
I
comment.
think
I mean, that's the whole point, right? Like the whole point is to disconnect, detach from
Ego death. Yeah.
ego and thoughts and limitation and all of that kind of stuff, right?
but that's
So because that's why, like for me, I'm at peace to be agnostic about most of any of these things, and I don't really worry about too much. I don't take them too serious,
And
but
when I
they're
come back,
interesting
I'm
to
kissing
talk
the
about.
ground.
They're just fun to talk about. They're interesting to talk about. But the real main deep stuff about spirituality is about letting go of all that. Letting go of
Yeah, I
that
think so
connection.
too. Yeah, I would agree with that. Hell yeah. Like
but wouldn't you say that with the ego, dude, just like how we discussed in the beginning of the show, Scott, wouldn't you say that ego death in and of itself is just a rearrangement of the ego in and of itself? Because we still only know about the self. It is not anything that is like the self is no longer there. The self has been transfigured, but it's still there.
Yeah, there's no getting around it because see, that's what consciousness is consciousness is for the ego. The ego is what's experiencing the thoughts and the ideas and the inferences and the reality that we project out onto the world that we think
yeah,
the world
I've heard
is.
you.
You know what I'm saying? And
I know.
so
Yeah,
it's
I
very
get that.
it's mentality. Basically the primary thing is mentality. And so how do you separate the imaginary things from the real things? You know, that's why we have tools like science. We use science to, we do novel testable predictions. We can say something's real if it meets certain criteria of evidence, which is novel testable predictions. What religious people do is they do this ad hoc reasoning thing where they say, well, the reason why, we have rainbows in the sky is because, see, one day God flooded the earth, right? With a big rain that happened. And here's the story behind that. Like they have all these stories that also have a moral to the story. There's some sort of moral message in the story as well. So it's sort of like a comic book.
No, I was to add on to what Scott said, Josh, because I heard you say this before. You said this the last time I talked to you, and despite the ego death phenomenon, you were saying that there's an ego still there witnessing things, and I guess the distinction I'm trying to make is that think about Rorschach block, the ink blot where like you can project. And you've seen Batman Forever where he sees the bat because the ink blot he's Bruce Wayne's, of course, see the bat, right? It's just a projection. But I think the point is that behind those projections, the underlying pattern is there for everyone,
Yeah, that
and
existence.
that's where we're locking into.
But then again, because I've seen people, including myself, through my own experiences, but I've seen also people who have done the heroic dose in and of themselves and got a completely different feeling of the heroic dose and completely different way of acting.
one
And
thing,
that's what I'm saying. It's based on the person. It's
well,
like literally, hold on. They literally state, right, that you need to have the right setting. You need to be in the right mindset.
yes,
You need to be in
Mm-hmm.
all
yeah,
these type of things, right? Meaning that if you're not within these type of things, your
yeah.
experience is not going to be the best experiences.
Joshua.
What you're going to get back from it is not something like
No,
you're
man, trust me, man. I hear your criticism totally 100%. I hear
right,
you, brother.
right.
But what I'm trying to tell you, and like, I'll remind you that there is
Okay.
a misconception you had when we first encountered each other. When I was talking about the heroic dose, you thought I was talking about an amount of mushrooms that's gonna literally kill you.
Right.
Like you had that
That is true. I
misconception,
did say
and,
that.
and I had to correct that. I said,
You did.
no, actually, a heroic dose is very far away from a fatal dose. It's just a dose that's gonna flip your mind around. That's
Exactly.
people that take heroic doses.
It's at the upper limits of
Yeah,
within reason.
it's not mortality that they fear; it's their sanity that they fear losing.
Mm-hmm.
Not their mortality. It's not death. And so like when you talk about like taking a heroic dose, dissolving the ego, I really am trying to point you towards a phenomenon that is going to dissolve every unique aspect of yourself, where you have nothing else to cling upon. That there's not going to be the carpet is swept right from under you. There's nothing else that you call. You can say you can call it your ego, but guess what? It's universal. It's what everyone by default, comes to. I,
Again, as I stated,
go for it, man.
I see your point, and you are correct. In the beginning, when we first talked about that, I did state those words 100%. When you actually stated what you stated, I looked up on it more, and I started to realize that psilocybin, in and of itself,
I'm not trying to
is
embarrass you, man.
completely
I just want to try to
different.
make a point.
No. But that's what I'm saying, and I'm validating that point. But the one thing that I do know is that with DMT and other things like that, you can get to that same extent. You can get what you can get on psilocybin.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is that feeling in and of itself of literally being lost at sea in a sense. Seriously, that's not even the proper terminology. There's no real terminology to express how you're within.
No
that
words,
state.
man. It's beyond
There's
words.
absolutely no words. But the thing is that everybody is different because every brain is different.
I
There are
agree.
certain brains that are
I
able
have
to
no
retain
argument against
it,
that.
right? And
I,
there's
I,
other.
I've examined that for myself. Of course, you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Like,
that's what you were just saying about you. It didn't help you to get rid of like
yeah,
people's
and not only
depression
that,
and
like I mentioned, I called into the atheist experience. I remember talking to Tracy Harris, and
yeah.
she's like, "Okay, that's interesting. Maybe because we all have similar brains and similar neurological structures, therefore we have similar experiences." That's fair estimation. I like
Mm-hmm.
that Tracy's thinking. But these professionals that I follow, and the neuroscience that I've been trying to influence you upon, they don't see it that way. They see it as a feature in consciousness itself. And consciousness, like we were talking earlier, we were talking about panpsychism. It may not be exclusive to human beings, animals. It may be present in plants. It may be present in things that we don't even know. And I guess what I'm at great pains to really try to express to you is that there is a universal phenomenon in consciousness, and I think the only criticism towards that is to deny that such a possibility exists.
Well,
You know,
I think
here's what Joshua said last night about that. When I showed him the Michael Levin video, remember that video we watched about the biopsychism,
yeah.
yeah,
right? Now, Joshua was saying in a way that kind of disproves panpsychism because it's able to show the interactions actually experimentally, and the
yeah,
predictions that were made that actually came true, like with the flatworms and the slime molds and the other things that he uses in his experiments, which definitely shows there's intelligence without brains necessarily, and there's just intelligence in
it's
matter,
biological
and it
intelligence.
yeah, and it's just and it
It's
sort of
innate.
we're
Yeah.
it's innate, and we're
The whole
sort of
point of
products of
somatic
that.
psychology.
But when we look at matter, like things that we don't call life, and I know that even that's kind of weird because we don't really have a definition of life, what constitutes life, because some
Yeah.
things that we call not life does a lot of things that we call life, and then other things that life does, these non-life things do. So it's all
There's some
mixed up.
things on the
So there's
borderline, like
yeah,
Yeah.
there's
viruses
some
and stars.
overlap there. There's a lot of
Exactly.
Like
overlap.
nature's throwing us a bunch of like swings.
It's real arbitrary,
Yeah.
And so, but if that same principle is true, then the panpsychist says, then why does it just start there? Why doesn't it go all the way back? Like, why can't the principle hold for subatomic particles, for example?
Well,
Like,
it's
does a
because
photon literally behaves? It actually responds to its environment, right?
Yeah.
well,
like
response is getting
observations
hit
and
by
things.
other photons and other situations.
Right,
such
in a
as that.
very,
Yeah.
very, it's like
But
on a
that's like
specter.
interference, though. That's not necessarily responding. That's just
Right. Well, here's a way to measure it. Like, there's a way they try to measure it. I don't necessarily believe in that stuff. I'm just saying that this is how
no.
they
go ahead.
measure
Yeah, I
it.
love your
Like,
speculation, man.
yeah, like integrated information theory. They say that at the very small fundamental level, it gets like maybe 1 pi. Because
Yeah.
it's of its response, just a very just
It's the loop.
asymmetry.
It's the loop
It's just
itself.
asymmetry. Yeah, it's just that's the thing. That's where everything's based on that little interaction right there.
Yeah.
When it gets more complex, more things start talking to each other and
Yeah,
doing
but
that
then I
dance.
think that the only problem that I have with that is that it's talking about consciousness of scale. And I
Yeah.
don't think consciousness works that way. I
Right.
don't think
Right.
consciousness works in a consciousness of scale
Scales,
type of
right.
mentality. I think that
Right.
it's much more complex than that. And as soon
It
as you
just
start
happens.
saying consciousness of scale, you actually lose out on the actual the I don't want to say the hard problem of consciousness, but you lose out on what we're actually talking about here, because then after you kind of look and you're like, oh, this animal has this much consciousness, that
But is
animal
that
has that.
special
It's
pleading
not at
though?
all what the situation is.
But would
Well,
that be
there's definitely restrictions in biology. Like
Well,
I watched a video a while back on the theoretical biology of giants, and it went into the limitations, the reasons why there are not 20-foot tall human beings walking around,
of course,
and
yeah.
there's a lot of reconsideration going on about how, for example, how smart T-Rex was, because traditionally, because the brain was so small in comparison to the body, it's assumed that there just wasn't the capacity for anything like that there. But looking at bird brains as opposed to reptile brains, that makes a difference. So
Mhm.
there's possibility that there might even have been rudimentary levels of sentience in some dinosaurs, along
Oh,
that line of
absolutely.
thinking. And
Yeah.
the other side of
One
it
thing.
is too,
Hey,
once you get
I'm
so
offended. They're not dinosaurs, they're Jesus ponies, okay?
well,
Oh,
the
for
other
Josh.
side of it is too, once the brain organ gets so large, then you have temperature regulation problems. And the same
Exactly.
thing goes for being small. There is a reason that rodents, for example, being the smallest type of mammals, breathe very fast. They have very fast heartbeats and metabolisms, because there are hard limits, as you go up and down in size in biology. Now, on a
Absolutely.
far more theoretical note, we could be thinking, for instance, in terms of speculative biology, which is where you get to, things like silicon-based life, or if we start playing with the idea that stars might have some form of life in them, which is something you see in fiction, whether you see it in
Right.
science necessarily or not. So,
Kev,
it might be more flexible there with fundamentally different systems at play. But when we come to carbon-based life and things that work the way we do, there's a hard limit of scale there. So as far as,
Oh,
intelligence
absolutely.
on the level of like neutrons and things, that would have to be something fundamentally different from ourselves.
There's a Greek
No, I
philosopher.
completely agree with you, and I think. Oh, wait! Greek philosopher? What Greek
No,
philosopher?
I was just gonna say that I think it was. Don't pin me to it, but I think it was Aristotle who said that essence is the same in each being. It's only the form that's different. In other words, that the consciousness that we have, it's the same in all species, in the grasshopper, in the tree, so on and so forth. It's just that we have different forms, and it expresses itself differently. But the Greek philosopher,
It's unique.
they thought of it as the same essence, though. You know, like we all possess
Like
the
a
same essence.
field,
Yeah,
like a field of consciousness, like kind of like a field, like a quantum field of consciousness.
There's no hierarchy. You know, like the ant is just as important as the beetle, as the ladybug, as the human being, as the dog, as the cat. So
Well,
on and
that's
so forth.
kind of like the amness, the oneness in Platonic forms. Like
Mhm.
it's where there's just this neutral, unconscious existence that everything kind of like it presents the
Yeah, hell yeah,
stage for
no.
everything.
I love that, and I like etymology. You know, etymology is the study of the history of a word,
Hmm.
and a lot of people don't realize that before we developed the term consciousness, they had no term for this, and during the Greek days of Plato, Plotinus, and Aristotle and so forth, they didn't call
Psyche,
it.
I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah, psyche. Yeah.
psyche, and that's the root word of soul.
Hmm.
Spirit.
And
That's
well,
spirit.
yeah,
that's
Yeah,
but I mean,
spirit.
I think that the only thing, because we also know too that the ancients didn't necessarily get everything right when it came to certain aspects of the body and of how things came to be.
Hey,
So
but they didn't get everything wrong.
well, it's the same exact thing as Democritus, right? He didn't get. He figured out what the atom was in and of itself, and actually gave it its relative properties and stuff like
My
that. So yeah,
favorite philosopher is Socrates.
Oh
I
yeah.
like
The
Socrates.
only thing we can know is we know nothing. Yeah.
it's true. It's true. But like that's the one thing that gets me though, is that I love delving into philosophy. I love delving into sciences and everything like that. But the one thing is that when we start to postulate things, because I love postulating, but when we start to become concrete within that postulation that we have, that's where I think we run into problems, and that's one of the main reasons why I think that spiritualism and skepticism, or maybe I should say secular skepticism to be more on point, is not conducive, or is now I'm forgetting the freaking word I was using. What the hell is it again? Uh, like they can't work side by side
Compatible.
with each other.
They're not
Compatible.
Compatible. Thank you. Jeez,
Yeah.
they're not compatible. Thank you. So, like, for me, the aspect is that we can delve into the question, and I love delving into the questions, and that's why, like, I would never blame people for delving into the questions. I think that it shows that individuals in and of themselves want to know. And I think the knowing aspect is the best thing that humans can possibly do. But when they start to make knowledge claims based on that knowing and think that there's some sort of validity to it, that's where I start
Well,
questioning.
that's why religion. That's religion. Religion
But
isn't
it's also
consistent.
spiritualism as well. It matters what
Well,
kind of spiritual you're
right. That's what
talking.
I'm saying. It depends. Like Eastern, more Eastern philosophy and Eastern spiritual traditions are a lot different than how we understand spiritualism, say in the West with the Catholic Church and even Islam in the Middle East. These sort of Abrahamic religions. They're more like declarations and they're commands. They're not really spiritual. Spirituality can be argued that it's not about that. At least in Easter, it's more about introspection and
Spirituality
subjectivity.
is a component of religion, and
But it is a
dogma is
component, yeah.
too.
So is morality.
Yes, and dogma is where pretty much everybody gets caught up, and this is something that transcends religion and secularism,
Right.
because
Right.
frankly, communism is a very dogmatic form of secularism. It's not the only form. It's not
Mm-hmm.
the form that's practiced in the West nowadays, but it
Mm-hmm.
is a form of state regulated secularism. Um, and there
Certain
are there
forms,
are
certain
very
forms of, yeah, certain forms of spirituality definitely are not consistent with skepticism. That's for
yeah,
sure.
um,
That's for
and
sure.
even the ones that are more compatible with skepticism can fall prey to dogmatism. Is
Yep.
pretty much what I'm saying. It's something that has to be guarded against by
Yep.
a responsible religious leaders. Like the caste system in India, that was Hinduism. That was the seat of Eastern religion, but that was also a very dogmatic system that was put in
Big
place by a certain understanding of the wheel of reincarnation. That because you were born into this tribe in this life, that's a sign that you were a bad person in a previous life. So we
Right.
can treat
Right.
you like garbage. That was the
Mm-hmm.
whole story behind the Untouchables. It was something
Right.
that was just assumed.
Again,
So that was their
declarations. Yeah, claims and
exact.
declarations. That's what religion does. For me, I think spirituality is by nature subjective, and so therefore it's your own story. It's not someone else's story. It's your own, and so you don't even need to. It doesn't apply to anyone else but you. For the most part.
Well, but that's the thing though, right? Like in the beginning, you need to learn based on spiritualism. Like it's not something that you innately have. It's sort of like you walk while you're in. Ah, my God, why can't I speak? God, did spirits have gotten me? No. While you're interacting with the world in and of itself, right? You get involved in multiple different things. And through those multiple things, you get influenced by other individuals who are doing certain things. You ask questions based on that. And let's just say if you like the way that that person is doing things, you delve into it. And then you start meditating or you start doing whatever the situation may be. You in the beginning, right, had questions, and through those questions, somebody seemed to have more confidence than somebody else. So you went along with that individual besides this one, right? Like the whole entire, and that's why for me, I'm a behavioralist because it makes sense. And most of the time, when we're interacting with stimuli, sadly, we go towards the thing that is more or less what we want to go towards. We already wanted that path. Now we're just heading down that path more because there seems to be more credibility to the path, right?
Hmm.
Because more people are starting to ask questions and everything like that. So it's like, beforehand, this was very critical, but now the path is opening and now I can do my run towards it, right? But
That's why
a lot of
self-awareness is
the
considered a
C
spiritual
part.
trait as well.
Exactly. And when the C parts, right? A lot of times when things are too simple and too easy to reach, that's when you start to realize that the edifice that that thing is created on isn't necessarily based on the truths that people think it's based on. If it's too simple, if it's too easy and you're like, "Oh, it's answering all these questions," rethink about it because that's
It's
one of the things
it's
that ends up crumbling the entire deck of cards afterwards.
it's definitely a story that makes sense. It's like every time we adapt these explanations for the things we don't maybe necessarily understand at first glance or things we can question,
Hmm.
we gravitate towards the stories that make sense to us,
Exactly. And our mentality, right?
and our
Like
mentality, right?
if we are spiritual in the beginning, then anything that has a tendency to be spiritual, we're going to be more beckoned to than something that is not spiritual to begin with. It's kind of like that philosophical question of can we choose to believe in something or are we set to believe in something?
Hmm.
Is
And
it
that's one of the
yeah.
things you remarked on earlier, Joshua, was how nebulous the very definition of spirituality is. and
Right.
it's kind of it kind of has to be that way because different people find fulfillment in different things. People
Mm-hmm.
find different things to be spiritual. There are some who, they find their passion for music to be spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Astronomy can be a spiritual thing, because of the reverence that it makes you feel. Pretty much any vocation, especially one that serves a purpose in the world that makes you feel a sense of purpose. There
Hmm.
can
Is a
be
spiritual
spiritual, I guess,
experience.
yes, edification. That was the word I was thinking of.
Mm-hmm.
It
Edification.
can be
Interesting.
beneficial, and that can be considered a spiritual pursuit in some ways.
You brought up, Josh, that you had a hard time reconciling spiritual with the view that you have,
That is
right?
correct.
And I was on a podcast recently with Christians, like not atheists, but Christians,
Mm-hmm.
and so we got into it, and I was recognizing what is very common with very um, um, uh, fundamentalist Christians is that they tend to pedestalize Christ. They'll say that I am the Father. I'm one. No one comes to the Father but through me. Like you can't have the glory of the divine in any other way but by accepting Christ. And I pointed out to one. It was a female, I think, and she was the only one that seemed to really take in the point. I said, well, if you really accept that, then uh, you're dividing yourself amongst all the other religions and saying you're creating a division. You're creating an atmosphere of tension. If you're trying to if you're trying to sway everyone towards you.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel a lot of materialists, like if you have an issue towards spirituality, you can't find a way to reconcile, the your perspective and how spirituality, how people relate to it. Then in a way you create that division as well. And
Okay.
I guess my point is, in my studies, I eventually arrived at perennialism. I think I told you about it, the perennial philosophy, where
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
these very heightened spiritual visions are not seen as unique or distinct from any other one religion. It's such that the revelation of the Holy Spirit is one of the same with nirvana of Buddhism, with the samadhi of Hinduism. These mystics who even undergo these experiences, they recognize it themselves. Meister Eckhart, he said, the theologians may quarrel, but the mystics of the world speak the same language, because they're all seeing the same vision, the universal one love. And so like so if you want to take issue with a spiritual language, like you don't want to come to terms with how to wrestle with spirituality and materialism. I think that in and of itself creates that same division of the Christian, the fundamentalist Christians who are holding Christ to a pedestal. It's one and the same thing.
But I think that already, and I think even with just like how individuals state, right? When you look at the mystics in and of themselves, not even though certain people might state that in and of itself that but the mystics, we're all looking at things in the same light. But when you delve more into the readings in and of themselves, and you start looking at the stories that certain mystics have come up with and become idols to people, such as the Christ, such as Muhammad, such as Moses, such as all these other individuals, right? You see distinction. You don't see similarity. You see distinction because
Yes.
and that's the beautiful thing when you look at religions. Like that's why these individuals in and of themselves, like that's why a Christian, no matter what the situation may be, is going to be a Christian, because there is that distinction. There are certain things that cannot be represented within Islam to
Mhm.
Christianity.
Well,
There's certain
I don't want to be misunderstood. I praise and all glory to our own uniqueness. I think that's what makes each one of us in this stream interesting.
no, but I'm talking of the ideology in and of itself, right?
Well, and what I'm saying is that the golden rule, when you scratch all of them at their core, what you find is a universal brotherhood, love. This is the point. Like,
But
There's a
it
difference
matters
between
who you
saying all
see.
religions are true and saying they all contain truth.
yes,
Yeah. Pantheism or something. Yeah.
Right, but that's the thing that I also, because anything could have a sense of truism to it. That's what I
right.
mean, right? Like every little aspect, even non-religious aspect, can have a truism to it, and I would agree with that. That's why religions are so, or it's easier to follow religions because they do have sense of brotherhood. They do have those type of aspects
The
to them,
golden
which is a
rule.
beautiful thing. And I would never take that away from religions to begin with. But underlying that, there's also that other aspect, the us and them aspect. Jesus even
Yeah.
stated that us and them. There are the Gentiles. That's why. What did he do when he walked to heal the woman's child and stuff like that who
Well,
died? He
but
degraded her completely.
but I
Degraded her,
think
he freaking called her all the names in the book, called her a dog and everything. And yes, did he
Hmm.
heal the child? He did. But after completely crushing that woman with horrendous freaking wordages and stuff like that. And that's why, when you really look at the beginnings of Christianity, he didn't have that many followers. Who were the ones that truly built the Christian foundation was Paul and his literature and everything
yeah.
like that, right? So, what we really need to delve into is what are we talking about when we talk about the mystics? What words within biblical literature are mystical Jesus and Pauline? How do we
Well, I think you said
differentiate
it.
between
I
the
think you
two?
said it.
Because Paul, if we really look at it, was not like Jesus.
You said
He had a
us.
vision though.
Yeah, us and them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and remember, we discussed it.
Yeah.
Because individuals in and of themselves, when
Yes.
people, it's called postpartum hallucinations.
No,
Hmm.
no,
And
I
through
agree.
postpartum hallucinations, people who are influenced by somebody and who had such an impact on their life can have hallucinations on those
Or
particular.
they come up with a lie in order to gain popularity with a new group or sect
Or
that
that
existed.
too.
Yeah.
But I
So,
think the basis, you said it when you said us and them. I think that's what religions are trying to rail against is this. I talked about it in the form of original sin, the original division. When you think you're a separate entity to one another, when you have the perception in for the mystic, they enter the contemplative state where they have the perception that all is one. And one of my favorite quotes, I think, is Ramana Maharshi, a very recent Hindu mystic out of India.
Hmm.
He died, I think, sometime in the maybe 1970s, maybe earlier. But he said, someone asked him, "How should we treat the other?" And he said, "There are no others." That's the insight from the mystic. There are no others. Because as long as you hold the perception that you're separate from any disparate entity other than yourself, then that's where you create that division. That's where the thought of sin comes into
Well, and
play.
here's the power that the spirituality has in that declaration right there. Because I could rail again. I could say, as an atheist would say, well, why do you need spirituality to tell you that? Like, we already know that. Like,
Yeah.
just we can view each other as one, and it's called secular humanism. Like, we
Oh,
don't really need we don't need the spiritual. But here's the thing: the power is in the experience of that.
yes.
It's one thing to say it. It's another thing to
Yeah.
actually
To experience
experience
it.
this sort
Yeah.
of oneness. And
If
but that's the stuff that isn't scientific. It's not of a material sort of method to find if it's quote unquote true or factual.
Well,
It's a
wait a minute. You haven't been
it's
following
subjective.
Have
um,
effects on people. You
Yeah.
don't even need to have a DMT experience that be affected by a particular individual that you run into.
Well, I
Mhm.
wouldn't say entirely that it's out of the realm of science because, I don't know if you're familiar with the studies of mystical experience with Dr. Roland Griffiths. I don't know if you are aware, but he was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer
Oh
sometime
yeah.
in like
Science
July.
does study the spirit. I mean,
Yes.
there's prayer studies.
Yes.
There's all sorts of studies that science conducts. I even had a debate one time with an atheist about that he was saying, is the supernatural, can science show the supernatural or something like that, or
Yeah.
can it test the supernatural? And the atheist side was no, and I'm an atheist too, but I was saying
Yeah, of course you can.
yes, you can test it. I mean, anything that makes a claim about the natural world,
Mhm.
like someone raising from the dead, or you can test that, and you can literally do that. Like,
How
No,
well
yeah.
you can
just
test
give
it
us
depends on a
let's
number of
how can
factors.
the question is, how can we test it? Like, someone would say, well, what is your criteria? Like, what I would say, well, it's a prediction. Like, if I said, if I pray to Jesus every day at 5 o'clock for lightning to strike my tree in my backyard and scratch my name in it, and it happens, I made that prediction and it happened, and it was repeatable, and I was able to measure it, prove it.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me, that would change my worldview 100%.
Well, I mean, that's
It
that's
would.
an example specific to you. I wanted to pay homage real quick to Roland Griffiths because he started this research in '99 after Dr. Rick Strassman, who started the DMT studies in the mid '90s, and he was just informed, I think, sometime in November or December last year, that he had stage 4 cancer. The
Mhm.
head neuroscientist of the psilocybin studies, and he recently died on October 16th. I don't know if you heard about that.
Mm-mm.
It's a huge loss to the scientific
Yeah.
community.
Oh yeah. Definitely.
But I really wanted to interview him, man. I was going back and forth with emails, but it never got to happen, man. I guess it
Oh
was meant to be.
man, Rick
But
Strassman is awesome, man.
yeah, well, Roland Griffiths is the one that passed away. Rick Strassman is still alive, and
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
yeah,
Gotcha.
even Rick Strassman was responsible for the DMT studies in the mid '90s,
Mm-hmm.
and even he, after a while, a lot of the you want to be careful with what you say, legality wise, all that stuff. And he let the cat out of the bag, man. He told everyone in 1986 it was Terrence McKenna that dosed me with DMT, and
Yeah.
that's how I got interested in all this stuff. But
Didn't he do the movie The God Particle?
the God, it's the molecule, the God molecule.
The God Molecule,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was
Or
hosted
the
by
Spirit? No,
It
the
was
Spirit
based on his
Molecule.
studies. Yeah, it was
The
based on
Spirit
his studies.
Molecule. Yeah.
Yeah, Spirit Molecule. It was based on his
Mhm.
studies. And he's still around. He's still doing research and stuff like that. But like I think I might have sidetracked myself too much, man. I was going with the point. I was man. I'm sorry, man. I was going somewhere with that. I think I was trying to emphasize the neuroscientific work because this is something that's concrete. It's something that can be measured. You mentioned supernatural. I had the opportunity to ask Matt Dillahunty, what do you mean by supernatural? I challenged him to define the term, and what did he tell me? He said, I can't define it because I've never seen an example of it. So he kind of like sidestepped it. But I think when because I argue with a lot of materialists, atheists, agnostics, and usually by and large, when they mention the term supernatural, they all almost unanimously mean something that defies the laws of physics, something that's in magic,
Something that's beyond
Yeah.
material. Let me ask you though, Joshua, that reminds me.
Oh, hit me up. Hit me up.
Are you a materialist? And what does materialism mean to you if you are?
I'm actually a physicalist. So a physicalist in and of itself means that everything, including particles and everything like that, are a physical entity in and of themselves. But at the same time, I'm also a functionalist, meaning that the function isn't just of one particular aspect, it's based on the entirety of the whole, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in order for the body to work properly, it can't be just the hand that works, because if that's the case, then of course the entire body won't be able to survive that way. So it needs to be
More
the
than the sum of
entirety
its
of the
parts.
body that works in a particular way that is beneficial for that person in and of itself, you know? And and that's the thing, is that even when we go into mind or whatever, or which I call brain, the ways that everything interacts with itself is the way that the stimulus that we get gets transferred within our brain, and through qualia, that's why we get subjective experiences and everything like that. Or just like how McKellen, I believe her name is, states, it's more sort of like a, they're like little gateways that information goes into, and that information is then read through those gateways, and from there it gives us a different perspective from every other gateway that somebody has,
Mm.
right? So that's
Mhm.
why my taste of something is different than your taste in something. It's different from everybody else's, because everybody has a unique gateway that
Mm-hmm.
interacts
Like
with
a
you.
molecule that that fits into a receptor. Like it's
Exactly,
like
exactly,
a
which is
key
unique.
that this unique key or something like that.
Exactly. And that's why, like, for me, I do think that when we look at the subconscious, it's very easy to break down that aspect into actually having certain experiences which seem to be the same. Because when you break it down in a fundamental level and everything like that, just like Carl Jung stated, everything kind of goes back to that primitive brain, that primitive
The
aspect
collective
of the mind.
unconscious.
Exactly. And from there, what does that do is that it relinquishes information in a particular way. So once that barrier is kind of fragmented between conscious and unconscious, it allows there to be certain things that come forward that bubble up to the consciousness, and we
Mm-hmm.
experience those things which are primitive to us in and of themselves. But does that mean that that primitiveness is a connection to something that is greater, or is it actually just the brain kind of reconnecting with its primitive self? And through the primitive self, what that actually entails is that there's not much there to think about, in a sense. There's
Mm-hmm.
not
Mm-hmm.
much information there for us to pull from. So henceforth, we feel that extent of being
On autopilot.
like, exactly. And
Well,
henceforth,
it could be a tabula rasa, like, the blank slate,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah. Blank
you
slate
know,
theory. Yeah.
or it's if it's grounding itself in this, what I mentioned earlier with Aldous Huxley, the mind at large. I think.
Rupert Sheldrake. You heard of Rupert
Oh yeah,
Sheldrake?
yeah. The Rupert Sheldrake, he's Terrence McKenna's friend. Yeah,
Yeah, resonant.
resonance
Resonant.
theory. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's another way
The
to put it.
oversoul, as
Even
Ron
with
Canada
Jung,
put
he,
it.
he talks about the collective unconscious,
Yeah.
and even the notion inside Jung of the collective unconscious is this kind of default reservoir of the memory of the species itself. Like it's an anchor where no matter what we have at the edge of our egoic thoughts, behind the veil is that anchor, and
Right. Well, that's sort of like the Michael Levin video. It's to say that there's this collective intelligence. All intelligence is collective. Because at one point, every single cell had to know how to survive and navigate its environment. And so as it evolved in complexity, that got passed on, that feature got passed on in nature, and it was able to actually create this intelligent problem solving sort of entity and entities that get together and create even bigger nested hierarchies of intelligent entities. And
absolutely.
so, and like we were talking about the split brain patient, you can have different personalities on different sides of your brain. You can have identity disorder, where you have all these alters. Like you can switch alters. Like
Yeah.
one can't see, one is blind, and they really can't see. Like they had one that this guy was born blind, but he had disassociative ID, you know, and his other alters could see. And it was really weird because it was
Yeah.
in his brain, it was lighting up in his where you see, that manages your
Visual
sight and stuff like
cortex.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it in the cerebral cortex, it was lighting up on these other alters that could see. But the guy that's the normal person, the one, he was born blind, he could never see. So it was really weird.
Yeah, no, no. I love stories like that because I've never seen an actual case like myself where one entity is sharing two separate consciousness.
Hmm.
Like maybe you've heard the story of Edward Mordrake, the prince. He lived. I forgot the year. It might have been like the 1800s, something like that. But it's a story in medical literature where he was born with a parasitic twin behind his head, and
Mm,
the parents would comb over his hair over the face, and
yeah.
so it was neglected throughout its whole life. And
Yeah.
so, but when this guy would sleep, it would whisper things that he would say that you would only hear in hell. Like he could hear the murmurings of this parasitic twin that was behind his head, and
Mm,
he ended up committing suicide at the age of 21. And there's a very rich story in the medical literature to the point where no professional could deem it false or true. They don't know. And I've never I like the one you gave. I'm gonna look it up, but I've never heard of one where there's a one entity sharing two consciousness. I mean that's in and of itself a whole avenue of interesting discussion.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, big time, big time. And that's the thing. There are anomalies which are out there, but I think those anomalies can be explained. Obviously, we need to have
Hmm.
better technology in order to explain the anomalies which are happening.
Well, they're
But
useful.
that's the
They're
thing. Like
useful.
once we understand,
Well, see, here's the thing. We can't even explain consciousness in one person in a normal situation. But so what this does, understanding this disassociation disorder, this kind of gives us some clues about the nature of consciousness. So we can maybe
right?
learn a little bit more about consciousness by studying these certain anomalies, you know.
Oh
Oh,
yeah,
of
definitely.
course. And
But
but
And
that's
to
no. Go
revisit a
ahead. Go
point you
ahead.
made earlier, Scott.
Hmm.
I apologize. Um, you were talking about experimental evidence for like Christianity, for example, and if you were able to get a really specific prayer answered.
Hmm.
Well, a point I just wanted to bring up is that when it comes to scientific predictions, it can often take generations for that to play out. For example, gravitational waves were predicted in the early 1900s.
Mm,
No one was
mm.
able to verify that until very recently.
Right,
Very
right.
true.
It validated what those men had said, but throughout their entire lives, that was an unproven hypothesis.
Oh yeah, so it's
And
possible. So basically, what that means is that the time to increase your certainty to near 100% is when that prediction unfolds, not
Yes.
before. Like
Yes.
before,
right,
if it's beforehand, great. You've got a prediction. He made a prediction on gravity waves, which in this case was not a big surprise because we have GPS devices and other predictions that came out of B theory and stuff
AI.
like that. Yeah.
but the
So
yeah, the bigger picture to that is also that like what we call currently the standard model
right.
is the way I perceive it anyway. It's more like a map of the known world,
Hmm.
and we can't really say whether we have mapped the entire world. In fact, there are indications that there are some unknown zones out there.
Yeah.
There are new particles being discovered. There are dark matter is still a huge enigma, and that apparently accounts for more of the mass of our universe than quote unquote traditional matter, which is what we're made out of. So
I think,
there are vast areas where
and see,
the
this is my
understanding.
point. I think that any skeptic or anybody who has any sort of interest or investment in science and scientific thinking would never disagree with you on that, right? They would say, of course, that's the whole point of science, is to start with I don't know something and start looking for it, right? And start coming up with a method to test it and understand it and discover it. So the assumption going in is that there's something out there we don't know. It's bigger than what we see. That's the assumption going in, right? So what really surprises me is like when I say, like, I think that consciousness or reality comes from something that some unknown property of nature that's probably very alien and different than anything we've ever experienced. That's the fundamental thing. That's just my imagination, but
Yeah.
that's an inference. But I think it's a reasonable
It's an
inference
inference. It's not
because
a creation out of no. It's not a wholesale fabrication. It's an
right,
inference from what you
right, and
see.
I think that's an honest thing to say, given what we know, that we're learning every day some new property, some new thing that was mysterious
Right, but
before.
I think what people would push back on is that what are you talking about this mysterious property in and of itself? Is it a person? Is it something that is beyond personhood? Is it something that could think? Is it something that could
Yeah.
interact with the environment that it's in, and let alone interact with the individuals that it has
So
quote
right.
unquote created, right?
So with my epistemology, the way that my epistemology works is that first of all, I try to make the least amount of assumptions as possible. That way I have
Occam's
the
razor.
least that way there's the least amount of points of failure. I don't have this assumption that relies on this assumption that all the way down, all these assumptions. I could be wrong at any one of them. And so the whole thing doesn't really make sense to call a claim a truth or anything like that. So I would avoid trying to make those kind of assumptions like it's all knowing, it's loving, it answers my prayers, it's personal, it loves me, it hates when it hates to see people
I
do certain
pretty
things. You know
much
what I mean?
start with the assumption, with rather the assertion, I guess, on my part, that the universe looks designed to me, and that is, that's the baseline, and everything else comes from there.
Yeah,
Unless Scott, you've directly experienced it for yourself.
yeah,
Uh,
right. Unless, and again, that's parsimony.
Personally.
Uh,
yeah,
yeah,
or
parsimony. You
parsimony,
try to
or um,
appeal to the least amount of
well,
assumptions as you
Occam's
can.
razor is another way it's put.
Occam's razor is the way to
Yeah,
say it. That's why, like, I think, therefore, I am is the most parsimonious, fundamental thing you can base everything else on. Like, even before you start the thinking
yeah,
and the reasoning and the ego self building, you have this. Like I said, I
like a
kind of
default
described
state.
it. Yeah,
Yeah,
the I amness.
yeah, and that's what I've been
Teacher.
trying to emphasize this entire time.
Hmm.
We can go on ad nauseum about the origins of consciousness. I'm pretty sure you've heard Terence McKenna's stone date theory.
Yeah.
There's also directed panspermia, where on a land far, like that Star Wars story a long time ago, far, far away. They ejected some kind of bacteria, and it ended up being here we are today.
Like Mars, the
Yeah.
meteors from Mars hit the Earth, and that's where we came from. We're Martians.
But I guess the point I always try to get to is that even like to try to transcend the language of being trapped in religious vocabulary. Let's say you took the big bounce seriously. This notion that you have the singularity, the Big Bang, and it collapses back into the singularity. They call it the Big Crunch, and it repeats itself forever. So you have bang, bang, bang. It goes over and over again and again. So every time it opens up, the whole point I think behind the mystic revelation is that it's all one entity. I think that's the only thing that the
Some
mystic.
people relate that to respiration.
Yeah,
those are
you know,
the respirations of God.
no matter how many times it reappears, of course it's not going to have the same name. The Taoist sage, I love this quote. He said, "The name that can be named is not the eternal name," meaning that it doesn't matter where it appears or where it comes from. Even the Hindus, the Hindus, when they talk about the
Brahman.
yeah, the Brahmin or the yogis that have this ability to resonate in that mysticism, you know, they say it's truly nameless. You know, it doesn't belong. They call them sentient beings. You know, it doesn't belong to one species. It's something that everyone within the multitude of the you know, multiverse itself. It's a potential that you can come to recognize, and that,
Source.
you know, that's always how it's couched in the realm of spirituality. That, you
Yeah.
know, it's not something that you're trying to grab onto a unique perspective of, you know, of yourself. It's something that you can let go and realize that everyone could come in this you know,
Well,
unity.
what's really powerful about that is when it coincides with modern science, when it
Yes,
coincides
yeah,
with what we learn from science itself. You
yeah.
know,
That's why I
when
mentioned,
it's just a different way of saying the
yeah,
same
the
thing. So that's
Einsteinian
where the
block universe. You know,
yeah,
that's exactly why I mentioned the block universe. Einstein, you know, he didn't believe in free will. You know,
yeah.
like here we are speaking to each other, thinking that we're, you know, we're at our own volition to say what we want to say, but yet
Not this
may not
person.
be the case at all. This was scripted. You know, I'm sorry guys, but hey, Mike, you, Joshua, man, all of us, we were destined to come together at this point in time, and there was no other
Oh,
way.
yeah, big
Um,
time. It's like,
Yeah.
well, I don't agree with predestination, but I do agree with determinism. I think that through our interactions with our stimuluses, that stimuli in and of itself directs the path of which we go. And henceforth, determinism is brought forward because we're just reacting to the
Yeah,
stimulus.
we're in a causal chain. There's no way around that.
yeah,
That's
Like
it.
we're in a causal chain
I take the
and
perspective of mind-body dualism, which is, it doesn't deny that. It just
yeah,
right.
and I like mind body dualism because it kind of says that. I mean, you may not agree with predetermination. I like there's another term, compatibilism. You
Yeah,
know,
that's
where
what
yes.
I'm into.
yeah, where it
That's
sees
what I do.
they're one and the same. Predetermination and free will, they're one and the same thing. You're saying the exact same thing, just in different ways.
Yeah, because the free will in that case is just you have the ability to do what you want, but
Yeah.
you don't have the will to change your wants. Your wants are determined. So you can't really
It,
change your wants and what you want to
Oh
do. It's
yeah,
like
no. One thing that
at
boggled my
any
mind.
point in time, you could say,
it,
"Well,
it
I
leans
want to
pretty
eat
heavily into the
cookies. I
difference
want to eat
between.
cookies really bad. Like I want to eat this cake so bad, but you know what? I'm not going to do it just to prove that I have free will." Well, you just wanted to prove you didn't have free will more
That's
than you
it.
wanted to eat the
Exactly.
cookie.
I'm gonna chug some
So,
gasoline. Yeah.
yeah,
Right? But
It leans heavily into the difference between like your favorite flavor of ice cream and then heavy conscious decision making as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
another thing.
but that's why, like, it's so many people, they get bamboozled with determinism because they think that, well, okay, determinism, what they believe is that once you're a theist or once you're in something, you're
Yeah.
always going to be that way. It is determined that you're always going to be that particular way. Or if you're an
hmm
atheist,
Yeah. I
you're
think
always going to be an atheist.
I think it's amateur stuff because like they're just approaching it and they're like, well, if everything's predetermined, what do I do? You know, but they haven't thought about it long enough. Like that question was posed to Ramesh Balsekar. He's one of my favorite gurus out of India, and he answered it by saying, "Well, you haven't been doing anything anyway.
yeah.
Whatever
But I
you thought you
mean,
were doing was
but
happening the entire
well, see,
time." Like,
well, this is why I would say you and Josh are now appealing to Chinese prisons. I mean,
yeah,
obviously that's what that means, right?
yeah.
You
Oh
know,
my God! Yes,
Joshua knows, right?
Alejandro Herrera. Jesus.
That's what that means, that you're
Yeah,
determined.
because I
So,
told Alejandro that I was the determinist, and then all of a sudden he's like, "So that means that you're for the Chinese system?" I'm
yeah,
like,
because it determines certain people go to prison
"Yes,
for
Yes,
So
absolutely.
obviously,
No,
that
but
guy's
yeah,
so
I think
confused.
I think I'm going to wrap up the after show relatively soon.
Okay, man.
But I think that all in all, like what we're discussing here is something that is really freaking
Good.
interesting in and of itself because
Fun.
everybody has their own perspective within this kind of discussion. Scott
Yeah.
Williamson is more on the lines with Cafe.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to this type of maybe not panpsychist or maybe panpsychist, I don't know.
I
I'm
mean, I
not
just
sure.
say I'm just agnostic. I don't know. I'm just not convinced. I don't see it as. I'm more convinced of biopsychism.
Yeah,
I can see that.
biopsychism.
That's been
I'm more
demonstrated.
convinced of the
Hey, but
possibility of
that's just his,
something as opposed to any
Right.
particular thing.
the
Yeah.
biopsychism is just a step up on the ladder of
It could be. Yes.
panpsychism.
It
Get
exactly.
out of here.
It could be. It very well could be. I admit that. That's why I say I leave the door cracked open for that possibility
But
because it would make sense. It wouldn't surprise me. Put it that way.
no, but I
Hey,
mean,
by the end of the stream, I'm gonna convince you, man. Not.
Okay.
Well, if not,
Okay.
at the very least, I'm gonna make Josh take a heroic dose. One of those.
no. Like for me, I'm down for taking the heroic dose because I'm not somebody who backs away from things.
Man, well, if you're really down, dude, I would love to meet up with you. Either I visit your town or you come to my town. Man, I would love to make it happen.
Oh, dude, seriously, we can make those arrangements, man.
Where are you
Seriously,
at,
because-
Cafe?
I'm in San Antonio, Texas.
Oh, okay.
Oh
Okay,
shit!
gotcha.
I'm in Montreal, Canada, but we'll
Man,
figure it out.
okay,
We'll
well, I
figure out
gotta.
some way.
Hey, I've been wanting to visit Canada. So, man, let's make it happen, dude.
Damn straight. No, because that's the one thing, man. Like, I love having these conversations, even though that for me, I might not agree with theism. I might not agree with spiritualism in and of itself, but I'm wanting to hear different people's perspectives in order to maybe enlighten myself in nouveau ideas.
Yeah, I know. I've always felt that spirit from you, man. That's all. Every time you've invited me on this podcast, I've always, man, been grateful because I wouldn't have done it any other way, man. If Matt invited me, I'm like, hey, man, forget about it, because like I already know there's an agenda there. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
there's no open mindedness there, dude. That's why his show's called The Hang Up. I'm just gonna hang up on you, so forget about it.
Yeah. He will.
Yeah, like that's the thing, and like even with me, I've known Scott Williamson for quite some time now. You know,
Yeah, I've
and
seen you. I've seen you have
might not
discussions. I've
be
listened to them.
on the same page, and we may debate each other on certain prospects, but we're still naturalists in that
Yeah.
respect. And let alone, I still give Scott the respect.
Yeah, no, I love both of you
Vice
guys.
versa, yeah.
I've listened to you, Josh, with Scott on your previous podcast, man. I to the whole discussion, man, all from beginning to end, dude. I loved it all, and I even like, man, Mike, dude. I feel you made a very cool contribution, man. Man, you seem like an open minded guy too, man. Thank you for being here, man.
No,
Yeah.
big
It was
time,
nice meeting you.
big
Big
time.
time.
And like that's the whole entire thing. Like with the Promethean secular uprising, I don't want it to be an echo chamber. I've always fucking despised echo chambers.
Yeah,
And for people, I've always wanted, because even with any of my ideas, I want people to push against them and everything like that. But at the same time, I'll push against your ideas, but do it respectfully.
and you do it very respectfully, and
Yes.
man, I like your style. You know what I mean? You don't come with any ill will whatsoever, man. That's why I've always liked coming on here, man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's the thing. Like, that's why when I was thinking about this conversation, I saw what Mike and you, Cafe, brought to the comment section. I was like, okay, you guys need to come on. You guys have to come on.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I couldn't make it on earlier. I have
Oh,
two small kids at
no,
home.
it's perfectly fine.
AKA, you came right on time, man.
Yeah.
You know, the universe is proceeding as it should.
That's right. That's right.
Agreed.
No, but I think that more conversations need to happen along this line, and maybe not a lot of people like in the beginning would want to come through, but I think the more conversations we have based on these type of subject matters, more people are going to be interested and more people are going to start coming to and listening and stuff. That's why I love after parties. I think after parties are great to hear other people's perspectives on the topic matter that is being talked about.
Other real challenging to epistemology is the topic of like UAPs and UFOs and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
That's something I was going to bring up earlier. When you talked about the distinctions between religious narratives,
right?
You see a lot of that in the
a lot of that on social media.
They populated the local universe with so many different things, and somehow they never encounter each other out there.
One of my favorite speakers on he would attend the UFO conferences. These people that they take it seriously. Jacques Vallée, all the Terrence McKenna. If you ever seen him in the UFO conference, I'll post it in the chat. Check it out, man. One of the greatest speeches I've ever heard him fucking.
Oh, he's great, man. He's like one of the best. He's awesome.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites, man. Terrence McKenna, Alan Watts is another one. But yeah, man, I love all these guys.
When I discovered them, that's when I did my DMT experience with my brother.
Nice. Yeah.
And we just did hits after hits and for a few days. And
I've been looking for DMT. That's one I haven't tried. I had a guy that told me he gave me DMT and I burned it I torched it inside a pipe, and he's like, "Nah, man, you did it wrong. You're supposed to vape it." I'm like, you should have told me, man. But it was when I was younger. I was naive. Now I know, like, it has to be vape. And so if I ever come across it again, I'm not gonna botch it the next time around, man.
Yeah,
makes sense. No, so I just want to thank all of you for coming on because this was a really good conversation. But before we end stream, Scott, I want to know, did I answer your question based on what you asked?
Yeah, you did. I understand where you're coming from. To me, it sounds like it's a semantic sort of thing. It's a semantical issue. But at the end of the day, I mean, I'll have to really think about everything you're saying to really see if I can agree on some of these points. I do understand the semantics, like the baggage that the word spirituality has, right? That really brings.
Oh yeah, definitely, man. I get that too.
It's a roadblock. It's really. That's why when I'm in the room with atheists, I choose my language careful. Same when I'm in the room with spiritual people. I know the lingo, so I can talk the talk, and we can all be talking about the same thing. Like last night, we could be talking about this stuff, if you remember, and we were all speaking in terms of just, normal terms, no spiritual language. But we're just talking about the same thing again, but now we're using different language to describe it, and that's causing the problem because it's semantics.
I
think
that's the biggest issue, man. Semantics.
Moving really quickly back to the UAP thing before we close up. It is helpful to understand that, I guess, cultural phenomenon in terms of there being different divisions to it. Like the one I mentioned earlier with the people who populate the local universe because they claim to be astral projecting and literally engaging in interstellar communication, on a psychic level. That is one element of it. Then there are the people like Avi Loeb and other more scientific people coming from a scientific approach, and they're looking for concrete things. So there are very different elements of approach, and people tend to conflate different things, which is why when people mention the word UAP or UFO, it's just a specific kind of response.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're trying to say. It's like. We can be talking about the same thing, but just using different language approaches,
Yeah, but I think it's also what you are tacking onto it, right? Because if we're using certain language approaches and we can both agree on the language, even if it's differentiating, like there were certain things that you stated where I was like, yeah, I completely agree, and you use spiritual wording for it. But there were other things that you stated where I was like, now we're starting to get into that realm of fuzziness now. Now I'm not there. Now I'm not there. So it matters what statement an individual is making in order for me to be like, okay, I'm in agreement, or okay, now I'm starting to be in disagreement, and I would push more against that kind of approach, right? It doesn't mean that the approach isn't true. It just means that I'm going to push much harder onto it in order to see where you're going to come from and how you're going to answer it.
I don't know if you've heard of Adam Watts, Joshua. He's one of my favorite philosophers, man, and he would sometimes acknowledge that he wasn't solely talking to theists. He knew there was atheists in his crowd, and so sometimes he would stop himself. He would say, when he would say the word spiritual, for instance, and he would stop and say, and if you don't like that term, then replace it with maternal. Because I really think that in essence that is one and the same thing, man. Because it's about brotherhood, it's about love. That's the point, man. If you're not getting that, then it's going over your head, man.
Yeah. That's what I was saying about these big ontological big questions. I don't worry so much about, because that's more like ego stuff.
Yeah,
that's like the
Yeah,
storytelling.
you're gonna
shit.
quibble over semantics.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, for me, before we wrap up, I think that the ideas that are being thought of here are very interesting ideas. I don't agree with the ideas, but they are interesting, and they do. I will think over them and think about them, really delve into them, and see if there can be any kind of credibility behind them. But at the same time, coming from archaeology and anthropology, and also understanding how the brain reacts to certain things and certain stimuluses and stuff like that, and how it can have hallucinations in certain aspects. That's one of the reasons why, for me, even though that was scientifically with psilocybin and everything like that, that they're utilizing in hospitals in order to help cure people with chronic depression or even PTSD or whatever the situation is, which I do grant. But at the same time, which I did also read up on too, is that these individuals do need to come back after 6 months. They do need to be reevaluated, and sometimes they do need to be given the heroic dose again in order for them to continue that process.
Yeah.
So we know that process isn't just this one set time for certain people. It is sometimes a continuous amount of time for them to be underneath that.
Well, I know I appreciate that point, man. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it can go both ways. Like I think some people do need another spanking from Mother Nature when it comes around to it. But but at the same time, there are some people like Adam Watts had this quote. He says, "Once you get the message, you can hang up the phone." And I think some people can get it the first time around, because when I talk about a heroic dose of psychedelics, I'm not I would only tell you to do it if you're mentally psychological ready for that, because it's by metaphor, it's like getting hit by a car. You know what I mean? You want to repeat that experience? That's something that's
not struck by lightning. You got to be attuned to it, or it's going to burn you instead of going through.
It's not. It's just not very. It's not about rainbows and man, it's going to be very scary, man. At the very my first time around, at the very height of it, if I didn't I was enmeshed. So you have the ego death experience, but then you come down back to the equilibrium of your, the baseline of consciousness. Yeah, and when that was happening, I was enmeshed in kind of both of these worlds, where I was still having this experience, and my ego was trying to track its way back, and it was ultimate boredom, man. It was ennui to the ludicrous degree I couldn't even describe. I had seen every movie, done everything. I was everyone. I was every creature. I lived every fucking reality inside and out, infinite times, over and over and over. The only escape I saw was suicide, death. That was the only way out. And I was like, man.
Oh shit! No.
That's a rough spot to cut off, man. Yeah.
Right.
That's God. That's Jesus saying no. Jesus don't want to hear about that no more.
Yeah, right. I said enough with the
Enough with
nonsense.
that demonic heresy.
Telling people to take drugs. Hell no.
Yeah, better get
No.
high on Jesus. Yeah, man.
Man, guy.
Okay.
Right, right. I hope he comes back soon, but if he doesn't, then we can definitely pick up next week or whatever, because I am planning to
Yeah,
have other shows next week. And if you guys want to jump back on the after party, that would be freaking fantastic.
that'll be cool, man.
And everything. Yeah, we got a couple of nouveau people coming through and stuff, so I think it's going to be really cool hearing their perspective and engaging these type of questions in and of themselves, and really looking at it in different perspectives.
Hmm.
Because that's the
If
thing.
I
Like, I
can,
want to.
definitely.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I apologize.
Oh, I apologize. I was just going to say, if I can, definitely. It all depends on availability. With the kids being at the age they are and stuff. There's
Understood.
always got to be somebody around.
But it's always going to be around this time, like there's always going to be the initial show first, and then after the after party. And the after party can be however long. It can be 3 hours long. It can be an hour long, however the situation is. So all in all, like if you're available and you want to jump on, just let me know. I'll send you the link, and we're all in it, and we can have this kind of conversation again, because these things are really freaking amazing to talk about. And this is like the Promethean Secular Frontier is an atheist channel, yes, but at the same time, it's a channel of ideas. And if we
Hmm.
can start talking about ideas and different ideas and everything like that, and if I can make certain argumentations against an idea or uphold an idea that is very hard to tear down, then then we're doing our job correctly. And likewise with all of you, if you guys have some sort of idea and I can't get through that, that's on me. That's not on you guys. That's on me not either knowing my shit or me not reading up on things as of yet. So that's why I love having everybody on, so that we can really get down and have that discussion and see how it plays out,
Hmm.
in a more like cordial way. So it's not just insanity and people yelling at each other
A
and stuff.
dumpster fire.
Exactly. There's no need for that. There's
Yeah.
absolutely none. And I think these are much better, because then everybody feels at ease. It's not like, oh, for fuck's sakes, I'm going to jump into this and everybody's tearing each other apart. It's just like, okay, I'm here and I'm having a conversation. I can say my piece and they're saying their piece, and everything is, at least fair. And
Yeah.
that's what I like. But all in all, with Cafe, actually, before we end, I want to give you that opportunity to finish what you stated.
Yeah, I'm
Because
sorry, man.
really,
My Chromebook died. What I was gonna say was that if I hadn't come down, I saw suicide as the only viable option out of that experience. Luckily, the drug.
Oh, man.
God
Man,
does not want you to say your words.
you cannot get that evilness out.
And two
It
Meet up
ain't
nights
with
what
deep in
people
there,
goes.
too.
experience when they these very high threshold spiritual experiences, man. And what it taught me was just the main point was just infinite unconditional love and brotherhood. That's it. I mean, I don't see anything beyond that, man. That's why I adhere to the perennial philosophy. And I see the underlying truth of all the major religions, I don't want to, I just want to make inspiration towards that unity. That's it.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay. Because I did want to state something, but then after I'm like, that'll just bring up a whole other
Can of worms.
conversation. But all in all, I want to thank you all for coming on to the after party. Oh, man, he's gone.
Yep.
I want to thank you all for coming to the after party. It was freaking fantastic. Great conversation. Great back and forth. I mean, it was fantastic. So thank you,
Oh
Mike, for
yeah.
coming on. Thank you, Scott. Thank
Yes,
you,
sir.
Cafe, if you can still hear this. Thank you for coming on. And until next time, guys.
Next time.
next time. Until next time, we will keep the uprising alive.
There you go.